During Sunday dinner, my son-in-law slipped me his phone under the table with a text that said, "Dad, check your retirement account right now. Then pretend you are having chest pains and leave." I opened the app and my blood went cold. $450,000 had vanished. I did exactly what he said. 40 minutes later, the entire trajectory of my family shattered. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to people who mistook your silence for weakness. My name is Howard. I am 70 years old, an African-American man who spent 4 decades building a foundation my family took for granted. Silverware clinked against expensive porcelain, ringing through the dining room with a sharp, hollow sound. I sat at the head of the massive mahogany table, eating my roasted chicken in absolute silence. Across from me, my wife Diane and our 35-year-old daughter Jasmine debated the itinerary for their upcoming European vacation. They casually tossed around thousands of dollars for luxury villas in the south of France and private boat tours along the Amalfi Coast. The unearned extravagance in their voices grated against my quiet restraint. I lowered my gaze to my own hands. My palms are rough, bearing deep calluses and scars gained from 40 brutal years working as the chief engineer at the city water plant. I spent my entire adult life deep in subterranean concrete tunnels, managing high-pressure valves and breathing in metallic dust, all to ensure these 2 women never had to know a single day of struggle. They wore designer silk and flashed diamond rings bought with my sweat. I looked across the table at Bradley, my white son-in-law. Bradley usually kept a low profile during these Sunday dinners, absorbing Jasmine's condescending remarks like a sponge. Tonight, however, Bradley looked completely different. He sat rigid in his chair, his face chalky and pale. A thick sheen of sweat coated his forehead. His eyes darted frantically between Diane, Jasmine, and me. He was breathing shallowly, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle twitching beneath his skin. Something was terribly wrong. Diane waved her fork in the air, detailing a 5-star dining experience she planned to book in Paris, completely ignoring the tension radiating from Bradley. Jasmine chimed in with loud complaints about her current luxury SUV, hinting she needed an upgrade before the trip. I chewed my warm food methodically, closely watching Bradley's violently trembling hands. He took a sharp breath, slowly lowered his left arm, and reached under the heavy wooden table directly toward my resting legs. Bradley slid his unlocked smartphone into my lap. His fingers were ice cold. He immediately retracted his hand and picked up his wine glass, pretending to listen to Diane talk about Parisian boutiques. I glanced down at the bright screen resting on my napkin. A hastily typed message filled the text application. "Dad, check your secure Vanguard retirement account right now. Do not react. Then pretend you are having severe chest pains and leave the house immediately." I felt a sudden spike of adrenaline. Bradley had never called me Dad before. He was a quiet, reserved architect who always kept a respectful professional distance. For him to issue a direct, frantic command meant our entire reality was collapsing. I kept my face utterly blank. 40 years of surviving brutal corporate union negotiations had taught me how to mask pure panic. I slid my own phone from my slacks, holding it below the table line. I opened my banking application. The biometric scanner read my face. The dashboard loaded slowly over the home network. My eyes locked onto the primary account balance. The bold green numbers that usually provided me immense comfort were gone. The balance read 0. $450,000 had completely vanished. A lifetime of grueling manual labor, of missing holidays, of working double shifts in the searing heat of the city water plant evaporated in a single afternoon. My blood went ice cold. The screen showed a massive outgoing wire transfer completed that very morning. I clicked the transaction details. Diane had legally moved the funds into an offshore shell company called Oasis Ventures. The authorization signature belonged to Diane. She had signed the legal transfer request utilizing the title of court-appointed guardian. I stared at the horrifying truth. Diane had used my own financial lessons against me. Decades ago, when we were struggling to pay rent, I spent countless nights teaching her how to navigate complex financial structures and corporate banking loopholes. I armed her with the exact knowledge she just used to execute the perfect theft. The sheer magnitude of this betrayal threatened to break my composure. She had completely bypassed the strict 2-factor authentication protocols and drained the entire vault dry. I locked my phone and shoved it firmly back into my front pocket. The time for simple observation had totally ended. I desperately needed to escape this house right now to survive. I dropped my heavy silver fork directly onto my china plate. The loud clatter abruptly silenced the dining room. I gripped the thick fabric of my shirt over my left pectoral muscle. I squeezed my eyes shut and released a jagged, agonizing gasp. I lurched forward, knocking over my crystal water glass. Cold water spilled across the polished mahogany, dripping onto the Persian rug below. I executed a flawless simulation of a massive cardiac arrest, drawing on every ounce of my disciplined focus to sell the illusion. Diane did not flinch. She simply rolled her eyes, her face contorting into an expression of sheer annoyance. She let out a loud sigh, irritated by this dramatic interruption to her elegant prime rib dinner. Jasmine crossed her arms and scoffed at my agony. She loudly declared that I was just throwing a childish tantrum to ruin their wonderful evening. Bradley completely ignored his wife. He sprang from his chair with explosive force, knocking it backward onto the floor. He rushed around the table, grabbed my left arm, and hauled me upward. I kept my knees deliberately weak, forcing him to support my weight. Bradley threw my arm over his broad shoulder and practically dragged me toward the front door. Jasmine yelled at him to stop overreacting, insisting I was faking it. Bradley barked back, shouting that my pulse was terrifyingly irregular and he was taking me to the emergency room immediately. Diane yelled from the dining table, commanding him to drop me and sit back down. Bradley slammed the heavy front door shut behind us, cutting off her shrill orders. He hauled me down the driveway and shoved me into the passenger seat of his heavy-duty pickup truck. He vaulted into the driver's seat and slammed his foot onto the gas pedal. Bradley's truck sped recklessly away from the sprawling estate. The tires screeched against the asphalt, leaving dark rubber marks on the pristine suburban pavement. I sat up straight, instantly dropping the facade of my chest pains. I breathed normally again. 2 blocks down the road, Bradley swerved violently into an abandoned grocery store parking lot. He instantly killed the roaring engine. He pulled his smartphone out from his pocket, disabled his location tracking services, and engaged the heavy mechanical locks on all 4 doors. The sudden silence inside the truck cabin felt completely suffocating. Bradley turned his head slowly toward me. His face lacked any visible emotion. His eyes looked utterly dead, completely lacking the polite deference he usually maintained. He stared right through me. "We are not going to the hospital," Bradley stated coldly. "I just saved you. They plan to lock you inside a psychiatric ward tomorrow morning." Bradley reached beneath the heavy driver's seat of his truck. He produced a sleek silver tablet. I recognized the rose gold casing immediately. It belonged to Jasmine. Bradley bypassed the lock screen using a sequence of numbers he had clearly memorized. He navigated through a labyrinth of files, opening a deeply hidden encrypted folder titled Estate Planning. He thrust the glowing screen toward my chest. I took the device. The cool metal grounded my racing thoughts. A scanned legal document filled the display. It was a comprehensive medical and financial power of attorney. The text granted absolute control over my healthcare decisions, my property, and my investment accounts. I scrolled to the final page. My own signature rested perfectly on the dotted line. Every loop, every sharp angle matched my handwriting flawlessly. Someone had meticulously traced the exact pressure of my pen strokes. The notary seal stamped beside my forged name belonged to a firm I had never visited. The date marked on the document was exactly 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago, Diane insisted I stay heavily medicated in bed to fight off a severe flu virus. She brought me hot tea and thick cough syrup every 4 hours. I slept for 3 straight days. She used that chemically induced slumber to secure a corrupt notary and forge this absolute surrender of my life. Bradley watched my eyes scan the digital forgery. He tapped the screen, swiping to the next file in the folder. A high-resolution scan of a medical evaluation letter appeared. A private clinic doctor declared me unfit to manage my own affairs, citing advanced cognitive decline. The evaluation relied entirely on witness statements provided exclusively by Diane and Jasmine. They built a flawless legal cage while I slept under the same roof. The walls of the truck cabin felt intensely tight. I handed the tablet back to my son-in-law. My mind shifted from the shock of betrayal to the cold mechanics of survival. I needed to quickly see the absolute full extent of the immediate damage caused to me by my own family. Bradley swiped to a fresh document. A stark wire transfer confirmation filled the glowing screen. The total amount displayed was exactly $450,000. The recipient account belonged to an entity registered as Oasis Ventures. The authorized signature at the bottom belonged to Diane. Below her sharp cursive, she had typed her official title. She claimed the absolute legal authority of a court-appointed guardian. My chest tightened. I recognized the intricate structure of this specific offshore shell company. 30 years ago, Diane and I sat at a cheap folding table in a cramped apartment. We barely had enough cash to cover the winter heating bill. I spent every evening after my grueling shifts at the water plant teaching her the complex mechanics of corporate finance. I mapped out asset protection strategies, wire protocols, and the legal loopholes of offshore banking. I armed her with the precise knowledge to secure our future wealth. She absorbed every single lesson like a sponge. Now, 3 decades later, she weaponized my own teachings to execute the perfect theft. She bypassed the standard bank security delays by leveraging the forged medical guardianship. She routed my entire retirement fund through 3 different intermediary accounts before landing it securely inside the Phantom Corporation. Diane knew I checked the primary balance every Sunday evening. She timed the execution perfectly, moving the funds on a Friday afternoon right before the weekend banking blackout. The sheer precision of the attack demonstrated zero hesitation. She did not leave a single dollar for my basic survival. She gutted the account entirely. I stared at the irrefutable digital proof of my financial execution. My wife of 40 years had systematically dismantled my life while serving me roasted chicken at the Sunday dinner table. Bradley exhaled a sharp breath. His knuckles turned white as he gripped the steering wheel. He refused to look at me. His silence carried a heavy, suffocating weight. I realized immediately that the theft of my retirement fund was only one part of their grand design. Diane secured the money, but Jasmine held the offshore account. The mother and daughter operated in total unison. I tapped the screen. I demanded to know the actual final destination of my stolen money. Bradley swallowed hard, his eyes dropping directly down toward the floorboards. The truth he carried was destroying him from the inside out. He finally turned his face. Bradley opened a separate encrypted file on the tablet. He displayed a drafted court summons. Jasmine was utilizing my stolen retirement funds to hire the most ruthless and expensive family law attorney in the entire state. The legal document outlined a completely fabricated narrative of severe domestic abuse. She detailed false allegations of physical violence and emotional manipulation to guarantee a judge would grant an immediate restraining order against him. Bradley traced a trembling finger over the custody clause. Jasmine demanded absolute sole custody of their 5-year-old son. She requested the court to permanently strip Bradley of all parental rights without any visitation privileges. The legal strategy was designed to completely obliterate his existence. Bradley broke down inside the silent truck cabin. He explained that Jasmine had threatened to destroy him weeks ago when he discovered her hidden bank statements. He tried to confront her privately. She laughed in his face and promised to turn his life into a living nightmare. She possessed the endless financial resources from my stolen accounts to bury him in endless legal battles. He lacked the money to hire a decent defense attorney. He stated he had lost absolutely everything. His marriage was a calculated sham. His son was being legally ripped away from him. His entire future was utterly destroyed by the exact same women who were currently dismantling my life. I stared at the broken architect sitting beside me. I recognized the pure devastation in his hollow eyes. He was mourning the loss of a family that never truly existed. The silence returned thick with shared betrayal. I reached out and took the tablet from his shaking hands. He closed his eyes and exhaled a long, shaky breath. I simply waited for him to continue his horrific, dark explanation of betrayal. Bradley opened his eyes and leaned across the center console to face me. He retrieved the tablet from my hands with a profound sense of absolute urgency. He opened the final document stored inside the encrypted folder. It was a fully executed real estate sales contract. The agreement authorized the immediate, irrevocable liquidation of my sprawling suburban home. I read the outrageously low purchase price and felt a sharp, violent surge of pure anger. Diane had accepted an offer 60% below current market value to guarantee a fast cash closing. Bradley tapped the bottom right corner of the glowing digital page. He pointed directly to the buyer line. He spoke with absolute terrifying clarity, forcing me to confront the ultimate, undeniable, soul-crushing truth regarding this totally calculated domestic betrayal. Look closely at the signature, Howard. The man purchasing your house next Tuesday is the secret lover of Diane. Bradley parked the heavy truck in my driveway 2 hours later. We operated with silent military precision. He handed me a crisp manila folder containing official hospital discharge papers. His paramedic friend had forged the documents flawlessly. The medical diagnosis read severe panic attack induced by dehydration. I pushed open the front door and stepped into the grand foyer. Diane rushed down the curved staircase. She immediately deployed her performance as the deeply concerned wife. She wrapped her arms around my shoulders and guided me toward the master bedroom. Her touch felt entirely transactional. She lacked any genuine warmth. Jasmine remained in the living room holding a glass of wine and completely ignoring my return. Diane pulled the heavy duvet over my chest and fluffed my pillows. She smoothed my hair with a perfectly manicured hand. I kept my breathing shallow and erratic to maintain the illusion of a broken old man. Diane delivered a sickly sweet speech about how I needed absolute bed rest. She insisted I stay completely isolated in the bedroom to recover my strength. While she spoke, her eyes darted away from my face. She checked the gold designer watch secured tightly around her wrist. The impatience radiated from her rigid posture. She needed me incapacitated and out of the way to execute her final moves. She turned off the bedside lamp and quietly shut the heavy mahogany door behind her. I lay perfectly still in the crushing darkness. I listened to the sharp clicking of her heels fading down the hallway. I regulated my heartbeat. The absolute betrayal of my family hardened my resolve into solid steel. I knew Diane would sleep in the guest suite tonight to avoid disturbing my recovery. I stared at the ceiling for 4 solid hours. I waited for the entire estate to fall into a deep, uninterrupted silence. The house settled into the quiet night. I mentally reviewed the architectural blueprints I had memorized decades ago. Every structural detail of my own home transformed into a tactical advantage. I closed my eyes and prepared to strike back with force. At precisely 2 a.m, I threw off the heavy duvet. I dressed in dark clothes and slipped a pair of leather gloves onto my hands. I cracked the bedroom door open and scanned the dark hallway. The ambient glow from the street lamps illuminated the polished hardwood floor. I moved silently toward the main security panel mounted on the living room wall. Diane changed the master passcode last month, believing she locked me out of the digital grid. She severely underestimated my expertise. I personally wired the entire electrical infrastructure of this estate 20 years ago. I slid a thin, flathead screwdriver behind the plastic casing and manually bridged the circuit. The red-armed light instantly turned green without sending a single alert to the monitoring company. I walked soundlessly down the corridor and pushed open the door to her private home office. The room smelled of her expensive floral perfume and fresh printer ink. I approached the massive mahogany desk positioned in the center of the room. Diane kept her most sensitive financial documents locked inside the bottom right drawer. She utilized a high-grade tumbler lock to protect her secrets. I reached into my pocket and retrieved a specialized engineer's hairpin tension wrench. I spent 40 years manipulating massive subterranean water valves. A simple desk lock presented absolutely zero challenge. I slid the metal pick into the narrow keyhole and applied gentle upward pressure. I manipulated the internal brass pins one by one. The lock yielded with a soft, satisfying click. I pulled the heavy drawer open and aimed my small penlight inside the dark space. A thick stack of recent paperwork rested neatly inside a blue legal folder. I lifted the file and placed it squarely on the desk blotter. I flipped open the cover and began reading through the meticulously organized documents. Diane documented every single step of her calculated betrayal with terrifying precision. I photographed every page using my phone, capturing the irrefutable evidence of her vast criminal conspiracy. The flash illuminated the dark room, exposing her treacherous hidden plans. She engineered my total financial execution from this exact chair while sleeping beside me every single night. I turned the page and discovered the core piece of her wicked puzzle. She finalized an illegal real estate transaction using an outside appraiser to purposely destroy the market value of my home. I read the horrific details. The document in my hands was a physical real estate appraisal. Diane commissioned this fraudulent assessment 3 weeks ago. I reviewed the numbers printed in bold black ink. The corrupt appraiser deliberately undervalued my sprawling property by exactly 60%. He cited fabricated foundation issues and non-existent black mold infestations to justify the criminally low appraisal value. Diane orchestrated this aggressive devaluation to guarantee a rapid cash closing without triggering any automatic municipal tax audits. She structured the entire sale to bypass standard legal scrutiny entirely. I cross-referenced the buyer information listed on the attached contract. The name printed on the signature line belonged to a shell corporation managed exclusively by Diane's secret lover. They planned to purchase my stolen estate for a fraction of its true worth. They intended to flip the property immediately and split the massive profits while I rotted inside a state-run facility. My 40 years of relentless sweat equity became their personal lottery ticket. They intended to erase my entire legacy with a few strokes of a pen. I carefully placed the appraisal document back into the blue folder. I arranged the papers exactly as I had found them. I closed the heavy mahogany drawer and engaged the brass tumbler lock. I wiped down the metallic handle with my leather glove to remove any trace of my midnight intrusion. I stood up and scanned the desk surface to ensure the room appeared entirely undisturbed. Diane believed she executed the perfect invisible crime. She assumed my advancing age made me totally oblivious to her treacherous maneuvers. I turned to leave the silent room. My penlight swept across the leather desk blotter one final time. I froze instantly. The narrow beam of light illuminated a crisp white slip of paper resting near her computer monitor. I stepped closer to the heavy desk and aimed my penlight directly at the crisp white paper. It was a printed payment receipt from a highly exclusive private psychiatric clinic located downtown. Diane had authorized a massive cash retainer to secure an emergency and home medical evaluation. I read the scheduled appointment time printed in bold black ink. The corrupt doctor was arriving at exactly 9 in the morning today. He was hired specifically to officially declare me legally senile and entirely unfit to govern my own estate. They planned to spring the ambush while I ate my morning oatmeal. The finalized legal trap was waiting right here in my own living room. I memorized the address printed on the clinical receipt. I extinguished my penlight and slipped out of the room. I needed to move fast before the sun came up and exposed my absolute survival master plan perfectly. The heavy brass clock on the mahogany wall struck exactly 5 in the morning. I sat completely still inside the dark wood-paneled office of my attorney, Mitchell. Heavy velvet curtains completely blocked out the bitter morning chill. Mitchell sat across from me in a high-backed leather chair. His sharp eyes quickly scanned the thick stack of documents I had just dropped directly onto his desk. 2 decades ago, Mitchell stood on the absolute brink of total personal and professional bankruptcy. He made a devastating miscalculation on a massive corporate merger. I stepped in, leveraged my union contacts at the water plant, and secured a crucial municipal contract that saved his entire firm from immediate liquidation. He swore a blood oath of loyalty to me that very day. Now I needed him to honor that absolute promise perfectly. I watched him carefully arrange the forged power of attorney, the fraudulent real estate appraisal, and the psychiatric evaluation receipt under his brass desk lamp. The harsh light illuminated the horrific depth of my wife and her treachery. Mitchell did not flinch. He did not offer useless apologies or hollow words of comfort. He operated with the cold, mechanical precision of a seasoned predator. He understood exactly what these stolen papers represented. Diane planned to erase my entire legal existence before the sun set today. Mitchell picked up the real estate appraisal and traced the appraiser and his signature with his index finger. He recognized the name immediately. He knew the corrupt network Diane and her secret lover utilized to undervalue my estate. He set the paper down and looked me squarely in the eyes. The profound silence in the room felt much heavier than the concrete walls of the underground water tunnels I used to navigate. We did not need to discuss the emotional devastation. We only needed to engineer a flawless counterattack. Mitchell reached for his encrypted laptop and instantly opened a highly secure connection to the state legal database. He typed with furious speed, his face glowing brightly in the pale blue light of the monitor. Today. Mitchell bypassed 3 separate firewalls to access the core banking mainframe, lines of complex code reflected in his dark eyes. He breached the administrative portal and pulled up my personal identification profile. A massive red alert banner flashed across the center of his screen. Diane had already initiated a temporary freeze on my civil and financial rights. She weaponized the scheduled psychiatric evaluation to file an emergency ex parte motion with the county judge. The court temporarily designated her as my sole medical proxy pending the final doctor report. She moved with ruthless, terrifying speed to lock me completely out of my life. I stared at the flashing red letters. The reality of my legal paralysis settled heavily in my chest. Mitchell turned the laptop screen toward me so I could read the exact judicial language. The court order mandated strict compliance. If I attempted to visit a bank branch, cancel any transfers, or openly challenge her authority today, it would instantly trigger an automated alarm. The system would flag my actions as the hostile, erratic behavior of a severely compromised man. A direct open fight right now would instantly validate Diane and her fabricated narrative. It would give her the legal justification to dispatch law enforcement directly to my location. The police would place me under an involuntary 3-day psychiatric hold. They would strip me of my phone, my rights, and my dignity, locking me inside a sterile white room while she finalized the massive theft. Diane constructed a perfect, inescapable legal trap. She boxed me into a corner where any conventional defense mechanism simply tightened the noose around my neck. I looked away from the glaring screen and met Mitchell's intense, calculating gaze. I possessed the undeniable proof of her massive criminal conspiracy, but presenting it right now would only accelerate my own absolute destruction. I sat completely trapped inside my own home, becoming invisible by the stroke of a corrupt judge pen. I clenched my fists, feeling the deep, rough calluses press into my palms. I refused to let my 40 years of relentless sacrifice end in a locked hospital ward. Mitchell closed the laptop with a sharp snap. He steepled his fingers together and leaned across the solid mahogany desk. He formulated a brilliant new defensive strategy immediately. He knew we could not attack the fortress directly. We had to collapse it from the inside completely today. Mitchell opened a hidden safe behind his oak bookcase and extracted a thick stack of specialized legal parchment. He loaded the heavy paper into a secure standalone printer. He rapidly drafted a lethal counter-document designed to utterly neutralize her entire operation. It represented a highly classified poison pill trust agreement. The complex legal framework retroactively transferred absolute ownership of my estate into an impenetrable corporate shell. Mitchell structured the exact parameters to remain entirely invisible until the precise moment of execution. Diane firmly believed she possessed the clear authority to liquidate my house. She did not realize this new trust irrevocably stripped her of all actual financial leverage. If Diane attempted to formally execute the real estate sale, the county clerk system would automatically reject the forged deed relinquishment. Her signature would instantly cross-reference against the newly established trust database. That specific action would simultaneously trigger a silent automatic federal wire fraud alert directly to the authorities. The hidden trap would immediately classify her fraudulent property transfer as a massive felony conspiracy. Mitchell meticulously printed the final flawless pages. He bound the lethal agreement in a thick black folder. He engineered the perfect invisible weapon to completely obliterate her stolen empire. I watched him assemble the fatal documents with absolute awe. Diane thought she played a brilliant game of chess against a defenseless old man. She never anticipated that I possessed the ultimate countermeasure. She handed me a loaded gun, totally unaware that the barrel pointed directly back at her own chest. We secured the physical trap perfectly. Mitchell placed the heavy black folder squarely between us on the polished mahogany desk. He looked at the stark white pages containing my absolute salvation. We finalized the highly lethal legal paperwork without making a single sound today at dawn. Mitchell reached deep into his jacket pocket and retrieved a heavy velvet box. He flipped the brass latch and presented a specialized silver pen. The sleek metal gleamed under the desk lamp. This represented absolutely no standard writing instrument. Mitchell manufactured these custom tools specifically for highly hostile corporate takeovers. The internal cartridge contained advanced disappearing engineer ink. He pressed the cold metal cylinder directly into my calloused right palm. I closed my fingers around the smooth silver casing, feeling the immense gravity of his final instruction. He locked his intense dark eyes entirely onto mine. The heavy silence in the cold, dark office completely shattered. Mitchell issued a cold, unyielding command immediately. "You must play the madman today, Howard. Fail this psychiatric evaluation intentionally. Give Diane the perfect illusion of absolute victory quickly. Let her win the battle today so we can execute the war tomorrow morning right now." The heavy antique clock chimed exactly 9 times. The heavy oak front door swung open. Diane ushered a tall, sharply dressed man into the living room. He carried a sleek black leather briefcase. He introduced himself as Dr. Vance. His eyes lacked any genuine medical concern. Diane guided him toward the plush armchair opposite the sofa where I sat. She retreated to the far corner of the room. She crossed her arms over her chest and watched with a predatory smirk. Dr. Vance did not bother with pleasantries or basic medical etiquette. He unclasped his briefcase and extracted a blank clinical evaluation form. He leaned forward and began the interrogation. His voice dripped with thick condescension. He demanded I identify the current president. He asked me to count backward from 100 by sevens. He spoke slowly and loudly, treating me like a stubborn toddler. He deliberately mispronounced my name. He asked if I remembered eating breakfast. He asked if I knew the location of the bathroom. He designed the questions entirely to strip away my dignity. He pointed to a simple coffee mug on the table and demanded I explain its primary function. Every single inquiry carried a heavy, insulting weight. Diane nodded along with his degrading performance. She occasionally chimed in with fabricated anecdotes about my supposed recent memory lapses. She claimed I regularly left the gas stove burning. She lied about me wandering the neighborhood late at night. Dr. Vance diligently recorded every single one of her malicious lies on his official notepad. He never once challenged her narrative. He never asked for my perspective. He operated purely as a highly paid mercenary executing a prearranged hit. I sat completely still under their combined assault. I tightly gripped the sturdy armrests of the fabric sofa. I felt the familiar urge to rise and throw this corrupt charlatan directly out of my house. I desperately wanted to expose their entire fraudulent operation today. I remembered Mitchell and his cold command. I forced my muscles to relax. I prepared to deliver the most crucial performance of my entire life. I initiated the silent adjustment immediately. I let my shoulders slump forward, collapsing my usually rigid posture. I intentionally relaxed my facial muscles, allowing my mouth to hang slightly open. I focused my gaze on a blank patch of wall just above the television. I made my eyes dull and vacant. I channeled the intense physical exhaustion I felt after 40 years at the water plant. I raised my right hand to answer his question about the coffee mug. I forced my fingers to tremble violently. The silver pen hidden inside my pocket felt heavy against my leg. I opened my mouth and let out a confused, raspy sigh. I answered his question about the president with the name of a man who held the office 20 years ago. Dr. Vance scribbled furiously on his notepad. He asked me to identify the current day of the week. I stared at him with wide, frightened eyes. I told him it was 1994. Diane shifted in the corner of the room. I caught her reflection in the glass coffee table. A massive, triumphant smirk stretched across her face. She practically vibrated with dark excitement. I continued my flawless performance. I rubbed my forehead and complained about a thick fog filling my brain. I acted completely disoriented. I asked Diane where my mother was, knowing full well she had passed away 3 decades ago. Diane gasped in mock horror and pressed a hand to her chest. She told the doctor I did this constantly. Dr. Vance nodded sympathetically toward her. He completely ignored me. He treated my presence as a mere formality in this calculated financial transaction. He asked me to draw a simple clock face on a blank sheet of paper. I took the standard ballpoint pen he offered. I gripped it awkwardly like a small child. I drew a jagged, misshapen circle. My right hand shook violently. I placed the numbers in completely random positions. I handed the ruined paper back to him with a proud, vacant smile. He sighed heavily and placed the paper inside his leather folder. I silently maintained my blank stare. I suppressed the burning rage building inside my chest. I surrendered my pride completely to secure my ultimate victory. The humiliation stung deeply, but the trap required absolute patience. I played the role of a broken old man flawlessly. I gave Diane the exact illusion she desperately craved today. Dr. Vance finished his evaluation. He placed his gold pen back into his pocket. He extracted an official certificate from his briefcase. He smoothed the heavy parchment flat against his thigh. He wrote the words "severe cognitive decline" across the primary diagnostic line. He signed his name with a dramatic flourish. He stamped the bottom right corner with his official medical seal. He handed the document directly to Diane. He did not look at me. Diane snatched the paper from his hand greedily. Her eyes scanned the damning text. A look of pure, unadulterated triumph washed over her face. She had stolen my life. She possessed the exact legal documents she needed to assume absolute control over my entire estate. She thanked Dr. Vance profusely. She praised his professionalism and his quick response time. She promised to transfer his remaining payment before noon. She guided him toward the front door. Her posture completely changed. She practically skipped across the hardwood floor. She radiated a toxic, overwhelming joy. She opened the heavy oak door and ushered him out into the bright morning sunlight. She waved goodbye like a perfectly devoted wife. The heavy door clicked shut. The deadbolt engaged with a sharp metallic snap. Diane leaned against the wood and exhaled a long, victorious breath. She clutched the medical certificate against her chest. She believed she had won the ultimate prize. She believed my 40 years of hard labor now belonged exclusively to her. She turned around and marched toward the kitchen. She left me sitting alone in the living room. I remained perfectly still on the sofa. I watched her disappear down the hallway. I felt the cool silver cylinder of Mitchell's specialized pen resting safely inside my pocket. Vance sealed the diagnosis, but the ink was far from permanent. Diane placed her smartphone onto the granite kitchen island. She activated the speakerphone function and dialed her daughter. Jasmine answered on the first ring. Diane spoke with cold, triumphant authority. "It is done. Bring the deed transfer tomorrow. He is incapacitated." Jasmine squealed with pure delight through the digital speaker. They openly celebrated my complete legal destruction while I sat just 30 feet away. Diane tapped her manicured fingernails against the cold granite countertop. She felt absolutely invincible. However, her arrogance blinded her completely to the hidden reality. Diane did not notice the subtle detail regarding the pen she used to sign the official medical document. I had silently swapped her heavy gold designer pen for the specialized silver tool Mitchell provided. The highly advanced disappearing engineer ink was already reacting with the air. Her signature and my entire diagnosis would completely vanish into nothingness within 24 short hours. I pushed open the heavy glass door of the Rust Belt Diner on the extreme edge of the city limits. The harsh neon glow from the vacancy sign outside cast long shadows across the cracked linoleum floor. The stale scent of burnt coffee and cheap grease hung heavily in the air. I spotted Bradley sitting in a dark corner booth far away from the front windows. He wore the exact same clothes from our previous chaotic escape. He looked completely hollowed out. Dark purple bags hung heavily beneath his bloodshot eyes. His shoulders slumped forward in total defeat. He stared blankly at a cold cup of black coffee resting on the scratched laminate table. I slid into the vinyl booth across from him. I did not offer any hollow greetings. We existed far beyond simple pleasantries. Bradley did not look up at my face. He kept his gaze locked onto the table surface. His hands trembled violently as he reached inside his worn leather jacket. He retrieved a folded piece of white paper. He placed the document squarely between us. He slid the crisp page across the table until it touched my hands. He exhaled a long, shaky breath. He finally lifted his head and met my eyes. The absolute despair radiating from his face told me everything. I unfolded the document carefully. It was an advanced wire routing trace from the exact same shell corporation Diane used to steal my retirement fund. Bradley utilized his high-level corporate clearance at his architectural firm to bypass standard banking firewalls and track the ultimate destination of the stolen money. We both knew Diane transferred the $450,000 into Jasmine and her fake company. We assumed mother and daughter functioned as an unbreakable criminal team. I scanned the routing numbers printed in sharp black ink. The financial reality hit me like a physical blow. The money did not sit safely inside Jasmine and her shell account. Someone else had already moved the entire fortune. I stared directly into his eyes and demanded a clear, immediate explanation for this absolute madness. Bradley tapped his index finger aggressively against the center of the printed banking document. He traced the primary routing number line showing exactly where the massive fortune traveled. The $450,000 briefly hit Jasmine and her fake corporate shell account. The funds remained there for exactly 22 minutes. Immediately after the deposit cleared, the system initiated a secondary rapid wire transfer. Jasmine did not authorize the secondary movement. Diane possessed the master passwords to her daughter and her accounts. Diane executed a complete secondary theft. She systematically drained her own daughter dry without a single shred of hesitation. She routed the entire fortune directly into an untraceable offshore holding account located deep within the Cayman Islands. Bradley explained the horrific truth with absolute precision. Diane utilized Jasmine as a disposable financial shield. She orchestrated the entire grand theft, pretending to build a legacy for her child. She manipulated Jasmine into acting as the primary legal target for the felony wire fraud. Jasmine believed she and her mother operated as equal partners in this massive criminal conspiracy. She blindly followed every single instruction her mother issued. Jasmine assumed the enormous wealth would secure her future independence. She never realized Diane viewed her as nothing more than a convenient scapegoat. Diane and her secret lover engineered the perfect ultimate betrayal. They used my hard-earned money to secure their private island getaway. They used Jasmine to completely absorb all the legal consequences of the massive theft. The sheer, absolute, brilliant cruelty of the plan left me entirely speechless. I spent 40 years observing the darkest parts of human nature working in the harsh city environment. I never witnessed a mother sacrifice her own child with such calculated, freezing precision. Diane sold her daughter to the federal authorities for $450,000. She planned to disappear onto a white sand beach while Jasmine faced decades inside a federal penitentiary. Thieves inevitably turned on thieves. Diane proved she possessed absolutely zero loyalty to anyone except her lover. I gripped the printed bank trace. I realized my daughter sat completely trapped inside a burning building she helped ignite. She had no money, no leverage, and no future. Diane destroyed both of us with a single stroke. She stole my entire past and she stole Jasmine's entire future simultaneously. Bradley understood this horrific reality completely. We stared at the truth. Bradley reached into his leather jacket again. His fingers shook wildly. He pulled out a thick, legally folded envelope. He placed the heavy paper down onto the table right next to the damning bank documents. It was an official court summons delivered to his architectural firm that very morning. He pushed the dense packet toward my hands. I flipped the cover page open and read the formal charges. Jasmine officially filed a fabricated domestic violence injunction against him. She submitted entirely fraudulent statements. She claimed severe abuse and physical intimidation. She requested absolute sole custody of their young son. She designed the legal attack to permanently strip Bradley of all his parental rights. She intended to erase him completely from his young life. Bradley rested his elbows on the sticky laminate table. He buried his pale face in his hands. A dry, jagged sob escaped his throat. He broke down completely right there in the diner booth. He confessed he possessed absolutely zero financial resources to fight her in court. Jasmine systematically drained their joint accounts weeks ago to prepare for this exact ambush. He stated he had lost his entire world. His marriage represented a horrific, calculated lie. His son faced isolation from his father. His entire professional and personal reputation stood on the absolute brink of total destruction. Jasmine used my stolen money to fund the attorney executing his demise. She secured a high-powered lawyer before she realized Diane stole the ultimate prize. Bradley wept for the complete annihilation of his existence. He looked at me with hollow, empty eyes. He surrendered his spirit entirely to the overwhelming darkness closing in around him. He believed the battle concluded before he even stepped onto the field. I watched him crumble under the crushing weight of the double betrayal. I reached across the small laminate diner table. I grabbed his left shaking shoulder with my powerful right hand. My grip tightened around his bone like a massive industrial iron vise. He flinched under the sudden brutal physical pressure. I refused to let him drown helplessly inside his own pathetic pity. I forced him to look directly into my cold eyes. The sheer terrifying intensity of my unwavering focus stopped his violent sobbing instantly. We needed absolute total clarity to execute the exact next phase of our dangerous survival operation. I stared intently at the completely broken young architect sitting before me. I delivered the final necessary command with absolute zero emotion. My heavy voice cut entirely through the loud diner noise like a sharp steel blade. You lost nothing. Wipe your face. Tomorrow we let them celebrate their victory. On Friday we burn their entire world to the ground. The heavy brass knocker on the front door echoed loudly through the main foyer at precisely 10 in the morning. Diane swung the thick wood open with fake enthusiasm. She ushered a short, balding man wearing a cheap gray suit into the grand entryway. He carried a battered leather briefcase and introduced himself as Mr. Vance, the independent real estate appraiser. Diane guided him directly into the formal living room. I sat slumped heavily inside a medical transport wheelchair positioned near the bay windows. I kept my eyes closed and regulated my breathing into a slow, steady rhythm. I projected the exact image of a broken, severely medicated old man. Diane ignored my presence completely. She paraded the appraiser through the expansive first floor of my sprawling estate. She spoke with a loud, arrogant tone, pointing out the custom crown molding and the imported Italian marble floors. She explicitly detailed her grand vision for the upcoming massive interior renovations. She told him she planned to completely gut the entire kitchen and tear down the load-bearing walls to create an open-concept entertainment space. She casually mentioned she would initiate the demolition work the second the old man was permanently relocated to a state care facility. She laughed a sharp, cruel laugh that bounced directly off the vaulted ceilings. The appraiser chuckled right along with her, taking sloppy notes on a yellow legal pad. He did not bother pulling out a tape measure or a laser distance tool. He did not ask a single legitimate question about the structural integrity or the recent HVAC upgrades I installed last spring. He operated entirely as a hired mercenary performing a rehearsed visual inspection. Diane led him back into the main living area and gestured toward the expensive glass coffee table. She offered him a glass of sparkling water and motioned for him to sit on the plush velvet sofa directly across from my wheelchair. I maintained my perfectly calculated facade in absolute silence. I kept my chin tucked against my chest and waited for my exact moment to strike back with fury. Diane turned her back to the coffee table and walked toward the wet bar to retrieve a fresh slice of lemon. She left the appraiser completely unattended for exactly 15 seconds. I snapped my eyes open and analyzed the physical layout of the room. The distance from my wheelchair to the thick glass edge measured exactly 36 inches. I reached deep into the left pocket of my flannel robe. My calloused fingers closed around a specialized micro-recording device. Mitchell provided the miniature black disc during our dawn meeting. I leaned my torso forward with rapid mechanical precision. I extended my long arm beneath the heavy glass surface of the expensive coffee table. I pressed the small adhesive pad directly against the hidden steel support beam. The incredibly powerful magnet locked the tiny microphone securely into place. I retracted my arm instantly and sank heavily back into my wheelchair. I shut my eyes tightly just as Diane spun around with the prepared drink. The entire tactical deployment required less than 6 seconds. I felt my racing heartbeat slam fiercely against my ribs. I resumed my performance of a broken elderly invalid. I allowed a tiny sliver of drool to escape the corner of my mouth to fully sell the illusion. Diane handed the cold glass to Mr. Vance with a bright, blinding smile. He thanked her profusely and placed the wet glass directly onto a polished wooden coaster. The hidden microphone rested exactly 3 inches below their drinks. It possessed an advanced acoustic sensor specifically calibrated to capture crystal-clear conversational audio in large open spaces. I knew the device would actively transmit the live feed directly to an encrypted server managed exclusively by Mitchell. Every single word spoken in this room would serve as a permanent nail in Diane and her custom coffin. She sat down next to the appraiser and smoothed her designer skirt over her knees. She leaned intimately close to his ear and dropped all pretense of professional courtesy. I kept my head down and listened intently to the unfolding criminal conspiracy taking shape just a few feet away. I focused entirely on their low, hushed voices. I recognized the precise tone of 2 greedy thieves aligning their dark interests. They believed they operated in total secrecy. They never realized I captured every single damning syllable perfectly. My planted bug recorded their absolute betrayal flawlessly. The hidden microphone captured every single detail of their incredibly corrupt arrangement. Mr. Vance sipped his cold, sparkling water and casually dropped the name of Diane and her secret lover. He confirmed they had played golf together just 3 days ago at the exclusive country club. He laughed openly about the absolute absurdity of this illegal transaction. Diane joined his cruel laughter, matching his horrible dark energy perfectly. She instructed the appraiser to deliberately list massive fictional structural defects on the final valuation report. She demanded he record severe water damage in the basement and document a completely fabricated termite infestation inside the master bedroom walls. She dictated the exact fraudulent numbers she required to bypass the state tax board completely. Mr. Vance agreed without a single second of hesitation. He guaranteed the official real estate appraisal would reflect a home completely devoid of any real market value. They specifically engineered the final price to reflect a 60% loss compared to current neighborhood standards. This massive intentional devaluation ensured a rapid cash purchase by her secret partner, while avoiding all federal luxury property taxes. Diane promised Mr. Vance a generous 10% under-the-table cash kickback once the fraudulent sale officially cleared the local county registry. He smiled greedily and complimented her sheer ruthless financial brilliance. He patted her knee, assuring her the old man would never even realize he no longer owned the beautiful roof directly over his head. The live recording secured ironclad legal proof of their massive federal felony conspiracy. They effectively sealed their own permanent doom while sitting mere inches away from me. I remained perfectly motionless, soaking in their pure, unadulterated arrogance. I slowed my breathing to maintain my brilliant disguise while they gleefully finalized every exact detail of my total financial destruction. Mr. Vance finished his sparkling water and placed the empty crystal glass directly onto the wooden coaster. He reached his right hand into his battered leather briefcase. He pulled out a dense legal document printed on heavy official parchment. He laid the thick paper flat across the smooth surface of the expensive glass coffee table. He tapped his index finger aggressively against the final printed page. He looked at my wife with absolute freezing clarity. He issued a direct command without a single ounce of hesitation. I need his signature on this deed relinquishment right now, so wake him up. Diane nodded enthusiastically. She grabbed a designer pen from the table and spun around. She turned her body toward my medical wheelchair, holding the sleek instrument tightly in her hand. She stared deeply at my supposedly sleeping face, fully preparing to violently and permanently steal my entire world right now. Diane marched across the Italian marble floor with heavy, aggressive steps. She stopped directly in front of my medical wheelchair and grabbed my left shoulder. She shook me violently to break my fabricated slumber. I let my head roll to the side before slowly opening my eyes. I blinked several times to simulate deep chemical confusion. Diane shoved the dense legal document directly onto my lap. The heavy parchment crinkled loudly in the quiet living room. She leaned down until her face hovered mere inches from mine. Her expensive floral perfume completely masked the stench of her absolute treachery. She spoke in a loud, condescending voice usually reserved for disobedient children. She pointed her manicured finger at the bottom of the page and delivered her calculated lie. She claimed the state required my immediate signature on a standard Medicare renewal form. She insisted my health insurance would instantly cancel if I refused to comply right now. She stressed the absolute urgency of the situation while flashing a sickeningly sweet smile. She promised she would take care of all the complicated mailing procedures once I signed the paperwork. The absolute audacity of her deception hung heavily in the cold morning air. She stood inside the home I built with 40 years of backbreaking labor and calmly attempted to steal it through a fabricated medical crisis. She assumed my deteriorating mind could not process the complex legal jargon printed on the deed relinquishment. She relied entirely on my historical trust to bypass any remaining mental defenses. She practically shoved the sleek silver pen into my trembling right hand. She guided my fingers around the cold metal cylinder with forceful urgency. She hovered over my wheelchair like a starving vulture waiting for the final agonizing breath of its chosen prey. She needed my signature to execute her massive federal fraud and secure her private island getaway. She tapped the signature line twice. She demanded I focus my failing eyes and write my full legal name before the strict medical insurance deadline officially expired today. I maintained my silent performance perfectly. She waited impatiently. I slowly raised my heavy head and stared directly into the cold brown eyes of my wife. I spent 40 complete years waking up beside this woman every single morning. I sacrificed my own physical health navigating freezing underground municipal water pipes to ensure her absolute comfort. I provided the magnificent estate she currently stood inside. I funded the luxurious lifestyle she desperately craved. I searched her familiar face for a single tiny shred of genuine human guilt. I looked for a microscopic flash of remorse hiding behind her perfectly applied makeup. I desperately wanted to witness a momentary hesitation before she completely destroyed our entire shared history. I found absolutely nothing inside her. Her eyes remained completely flat and entirely transactional. She viewed my existence solely as an expired liability blocking her path to stolen wealth. She did not see a loyal husband sitting inside the wheelchair. She only saw a massive pile of untraceable offshore cash. She tapped her expensive high heel against the polished marble floor to signal her growing annoyance. She crossed her arms over her chest and narrowed her dark gaze. She demanded I stop wasting her valuable time and sign the medical forms immediately. The profound emptiness in her soul finally severed the last remaining emotional thread I possessed. I accepted the heavy legal document resting on my flannel lap. I gripped the specialized silver pen Mitchell provided during our intense dawn strategy meeting. I positioned the cold metal tip directly above the bold black signature line. The appraiser watched me with absolute predatory anticipation from the velvet sofa. He leaned forward to witness the exact moment my estate transferred into his corrupt hands. He grinned broadly at Diane. I channeled the intense, blistering rage burning inside my chest into a brilliant final physical performance. I forced my right hand to shake violently across the crisp white parchment. I gripped the silver cylinder tightly to maintain my brilliant disguise. I utilized the highly classified engineer ink to complete her fraudulent trap today. I pressed the ballpoint firmly against the bottom of the long page. I felt the smooth metallic casing glide effortlessly across the thick document. The advanced chemical solution flowed perfectly over the black line, I executed the ultimate silent retaliation right in front of them. I finished writing my legal signature. The silver pen moved very slowly. I completed the final perfect letter. I finally stopped my hand. I released the heavy document. Diane snatched the thick parchment directly off my lap with greedy lightning speed. She completely ignored my slumped posture and vacant expression. She possessed the ultimate legal prize, and I immediately ceased to exist in her reality. She practically floated across the polished Italian marble floor toward the velvet sofa. She handed the freshly signed deed relinquishment directly to the corrupt appraiser. He examined the dark wet ink and nodded with deep professional satisfaction. He carefully secured the fraudulent paper inside his battered leather briefcase and snapped the brass latches shut. Diane clapped her hands together in a twisted display of pure, unadulterated triumph. She celebrated her massive victory right inside my own beautiful living room. They exchanged a brief, victorious glance that confirmed their successful criminal conspiracy completely. Diane escorted him toward the heavy oak front door with eager, rushed steps. She announced they needed to transport the paperwork directly to the county clerk down at the municipal building immediately. She wanted to officially finalize the illicit transfer before the government offices closed for the busy afternoon. She grabbed her expensive designer purse and slipped into her dark leather coat. She did not cast a single backward glance toward the medical wheelchair where I sat perfectly still. She walked out of the house and pulled the heavy door shut firmly behind her. The deadbolt engaged with a loud, echoing mechanical click. I remained completely motionless inside the massive, empty room for exactly 30 continuous seconds. I listened intently as the aggressive roar of her luxury engine faded down the long, private driveway. The profound silence of the sprawling estate settled around me like a heavy protective blanket. The absolute perfect legal trap was now fully operational and ready to completely destroy her forever today. I stood up from the confining medical wheelchair with perfect, rigid posture. I rolled my broad shoulders back and stretched my long arms. My joints popped loudly in the quiet room. The facade of the broken, helpless old man vanished completely into thin air. I retrieved my secured cell phone from the deep pocket of my flannel robe. I quickly unlocked the encrypted screen and dialed Mitchell directly on his private secure line. He answered the call on the very first ring. I stared out the massive bay windows toward the empty concrete driveway. I spoke into the receiver with absolute icy precision. I felt the ultimate victory surging through my veins right now. They took the bait. Activate the federal injunction. She just walked out the door with a blank piece of paper. The massive legal counterattack immediately began destroying her entire fake criminal empire completely and permanently today. The grand ballroom of the downtown luxury hotel glittered under the brilliant light of massive crystal chandeliers. Friday evening arrived, bringing the highly anticipated launch party for Jasmine and her newly formed corporate entity. The entire event represented a spectacular monument to absolute fraud. Waiters dressed in pristine white tuxedos circulated through the crowded room carrying silver trays loaded with expensive vintage champagne. Flashbulbs popped continuously as hired photographers captured the fabricated success of the city and its newest young entrepreneur. Jasmine stood near the center of the room, soaking up the artificial adoration. She wore a stunning crimson designer gown purchased entirely with my stolen retirement funds. She posed for the cameras with a wide, rehearsed smile projecting the perfect image of a brilliant business visionary. She genuinely believed she had conquered the world, completely unaware of the federal crosshairs aimed directly at her back. Diane occupied a prime position near the lavish ice sculpture dominating the main buffet table. She wore a custom-tailored emerald dress that practically shimmered in the ambient light. She held a crystal flute of champagne in her right hand. Her secret lover stood proudly beside her wearing a sharp charcoal suit. Diane paraded him in front of the wealthy local elites and prominent socialites. She introduced him to everyone as her brilliant independent financial strategist. She openly flaunted the man who helped orchestrate my total destruction right in front of the elite. They laughed together, sipping expensive wine and trading whispered jokes. They believed they had successfully executed the absolute perfect crime. They assumed I sat locked away inside a sterile psychiatric facility, drooling onto my flannel robe. The sheer arrogance radiating from their corner of the ballroom felt almost physically suffocating. They drank my wealth. They cheered my demise. They constructed an empire built on a foundation of wicked lies and treacherous deception. The elegant string quartet played a lively classical piece, filling the massive room with a sense of refined sophistication. The party represented the absolute peak of their stolen triumph. It was the exact moment before the inevitable devastating fall. The massive heavy oak doors at the grand entrance of the ballroom suddenly swung open with a loud echoing crash. The physical impact reverberated against the polished marble walls. I stepped smoothly inside the glittering venue. I completely discarded the pathetic gray flannel robe and the incredibly humiliating medical wheelchair. I wore a sharp custom-tailored solid black suit. The crisp white shirt and the dark silk tie projected absolute undeniable authority. I moved across the pristine carpet with perfect rigid posture. My stride carried the heavy measured weight of 40 years spent governing men and machines inside the subterranean water plants. I did not shuffle or stumble like the broken elderly invalid they gleefully abandoned. I marched forward with the terrifying, relentless momentum of a massive freight train. The elegant string quartet immediately faltered. The lead violinist dropped his bow. The lively classical music died a sudden, awkward death. The sudden, devastating silence rolled rapidly across the expansive room like a suffocating tidal wave. Hundreds of wealthy guests stopped mid-sentence. The clinking of crystal champagne glasses ceased entirely. Every single eye in the crowded room locked directly onto my approaching figure. They parted instinctively, creating a wide, clear path through the center of the ballroom. I stared straight ahead, ignoring the shocked whispers and the bewildered gasps rippling through the elite crowd. I scanned the completely frozen faces, actively searching for my designated targets. Diane noticed the abrupt silence spreading across the venue. She turned her head away from the lavish ice sculpture to identify the disruption. The crystal flute of expensive champagne slipped entirely from her manicured fingers. The glass shattered violently against the marble floor. Her jaw dropped open in pure, unadulterated horror. Her secret lover took a sudden, terrified step backward. All the arrogant color instantly drained from his face, leaving him completely pale. They stared at me as if a buried corpse had just kicked open its own coffin and returned to the surface to claim bloody vengeance. I looked exactly like the very man she swore was suffering from severe cognitive decline. I stood tall, radiating pure, lethal energy. I dominated the massive space completely with my absolute presence. I did not blink. I did not break my terrifying, intense gaze. I walked very steadily toward the exact center of the fabricated empire they built, using my stolen blood and my stolen sweat. Jasmine finally shattered the crushing paralysis gripping the terrified room. She marched directly toward me with her face twisted into an ugly mask of pure, unadulterated rage. Her designer crimson gown swept aggressively across the polished marble floor. She completely ignored the bewildered stares of her wealthy high society guests. She closed the distance between us and stopped mere inches from my chest. She glared up at me with fierce, burning indignation. Her eyes narrowed into tiny, vicious slits. She lowered her voice into a harsh, violent whisper intended solely for my ears. She demanded to know exactly what I thought I was doing, ruining her massive, spectacular launch party. She ordered me to turn around and leave the expensive venue immediately before I completely humiliated her in front of the entire city elite. She threatened to call the hotel security guards and have me forcefully dragged out into the dark alleyway like a common trespassing vagrant. She accused me of deliberately trying to sabotage her brilliant independent corporate success. She hissed that I belonged locked inside a hospital ward, not standing inside her glamorous, luxurious event. The sheer ungrateful audacity spilling from her painted lips simply confirmed the absolute necessity of her impending destruction. She possessed no real wealth, no actual intelligence, and absolutely no moral compass. She remained nothing more than a pathetic, disposable pawn inside her mother and her massive criminal conspiracy. She truly believed she held the supreme power in this dynamic. She shoved her manicured finger aggressively into my chest, demanding my immediate compliance. She commanded me to retreat back into the shadows and die quietly. I stood perfectly still, absorbing her venomous, hissing words without reacting. I did not flinch. I did not offer a single verbal response to her incredibly childish tantrum tonight. I ignored her pathetic, frantic demands completely. I did not acknowledge her existence. I looked directly past her shaking shoulder toward the massive main entrance of the glittering ballroom. The heavy oak doors remained securely pinned open. Bradley stepped aggressively into the brightly illuminated room. He no longer projected the shattered aura of an utterly defeated victim. He radiated the absolute terrifying intensity of a man executing pure, flawless vengeance. He stood exceptionally tall, wearing a sharp, tailored suit. Behind him marched 4 heavily armed, uniformed police officers. Their tactical gear starkly contrasted with the luxurious, elegant party decorations. A grim, imposing federal marshal flanked them securely, holding a thick, dense stack of highly classified arrest warrants tightly in his massive right hand. The ultimate legal trap finally snapped entirely shut. The devastating ambush officially commenced instantly. The absolute total destruction of their entire wicked stolen empire began right now. Jasmine exploded with blinding fury the second the uniformed officers crossed the threshold of her glittering event. She marched aggressively toward the lead policeman and shoved her manicured finger directly into his chest. She screamed that this was a highly exclusive private corporate function and demanded their immediate departure. She threatened to sue the entire police department for illegal trespassing and harassment. She promised to ruin their careers using her newly acquired wealth and high society connections. The officers remained completely unfazed by her childish shrieking. They stood like solid stone statues in the center of the massive ballroom. Diane realized her daughter was rapidly losing control of the delicate situation. She abandoned her frozen posture near the melting ice sculpture and rushed forward to intercept the authorities. She pushed Jasmine behind her back and deployed her perfectly rehearsed performance of a deeply concerned matriarch. She smoothed her custom emerald dress and addressed the commanding officer with a sickly sweet tone of false authority. She pointed a condescending finger toward me where I stood tall in my black suit. She explicitly told the officers that they needed to ignore my disruptive presence entirely. She stated with absolute fake conviction that her husband suffered from severe late-stage cognitive decline. She claimed I frequently wandered away from my medical caregivers and suffered from violent paranoid delusions. She insisted this entire spectacle was merely a tragic symptom of my rapidly deteriorating mental health. She crossed her arms and proudly declared herself my sole legal guardian and absolute medical proxy. She demanded the officers safely escort me back to a locked psychiatric facility immediately before I caused any further public embarrassment. She spoke with the supreme arrogant confidence of a woman who believed she held every single winning card in the deck. She expected the authorities to blindly accept her fabricated narrative and physically drag me out of the luxurious venue in heavy chains. She severely underestimated the lethal counterattack we had meticulously prepared for this exact moment. She genuinely believed her wicked lies represented an impenetrable fortress of absolute, total, ultimate safety. Mitchell stepped seamlessly out from the deep shadows near the marble entrance. He wore a perfectly tailored navy suit and carried a thick black leather folder under his right arm. He bypassed the terrified party guests and walked directly toward Diane with the cold, mechanical precision of a seasoned executioner. He stopped beside the lead police officer and presented a heavily stamped official legal document. He announced in a booming, authoritative voice that he carried an emergency Supreme Court injunction. The sweeping federal order instantly nullified any local jurisdictional claims Diane previously established through her fraudulent maneuvering. The High Court explicitly stripped her of all medical and financial proxy rights pending an immediate criminal investigation. Diane scoffed loudly and rolled her eyes at his dramatic presentation. She practically laughed in his face while clutching her expensive designer purse. She arrogantly informed Mitchell that his federal injunction arrived entirely too late to change anything. She smugly declared that she possessed the finalized medical certificate and the legally binding deed relinquishment proving her absolute authority over the entire estate. Mitchell stared at her with absolute freezing intensity. He extended his open palm and issued a direct, unyielding command. He forced Diane to produce the official signed documents right now in front of the assembled federal authorities. She smirked triumphantly and reached deep inside her leather handbag. She pulled out the heavy folded parchment pages she guarded so closely since the morning evaluation. She thrust the documents aggressively toward Mitchell to prove her ultimate victory. She expected to display my shaky signature and Dr. Vance and his official diagnosis. She flipped the pages open with a sharp, violent snap of her wrists. Her victorious smirk instantly vanished from her pale face. The expensive, heavy parchment pages were completely blank. The highly advanced disappearing engineer ink had completely evaporated into the surrounding air hours ago. Not a single trace of blue or black ink remained on the crisp white paper. The damning medical diagnosis and my forced signature were entirely erased from existence. She held nothing but useless, empty sheets of paper. Her entire legal fortress crumbled instantly into dust right inside her trembling hands. The sheer absolute terror finally registered in her wide, panicked brown eyes. She realized she had officially surrendered her entire stolen empire for absolutely nothing tonight. She finally understood that her brilliant, invisible crime was completely and utterly destroyed. Mitchell did not give Diane a single moment to process her massive, catastrophic failure. He reached into his thick leather folder and retrieved a high-powered digital audio speaker. He connected the black device directly to his encrypted smartphone with a sleek cord. He raised the heavy speaker high above his shoulder to ensure maximum acoustic projection across the silent ballroom. He pressed a single button on his phone screen. The crystal-clear audio recording from the hidden microphone planted beneath my glass coffee table boomed through the massive venue. Diane and her cruel, arrogant voice echoed loudly against the crystal chandeliers. The entire high society crowd listened in absolute stunned silence as she explicitly ordered the corrupt appraiser to fabricate severe structural damage. They heard her demanding massive fictional foundation defects to drastically lower the official home valuation. They listened as she gleefully outlined her massive scheme to completely evade federal property taxes. They heard the appraiser openly confirming his corrupt alliance with her secret financial strategist. They heard Diane promising a 10% illegal cash kickback for his treasonous cooperation. The incredibly damning audio completely shattered her carefully cultivated public image of a sophisticated elite entrepreneur. The wealthy socialites and prominent business owners immediately recognized the sheer undeniable depth of her wicked criminality. The glittering attendees began to back away from her in absolute profound disgust. They created a massive empty circle around Diane and her terrified secret lover. They recoiled from her as if she carried a highly contagious, deadly plague. She stood completely exposed beneath the brilliant, bright lights of her own fabricated launch party. The crushing reality of her absolute public destruction pinned her firmly to the polished marble floor. She suddenly realized she possessed nowhere left to hide from the advancing federal authorities today. The towering federal marshal stepped directly into the empty circle with heavy, purposeful strides. He unclipped a pair of solid steel handcuffs from his dark tactical belt. The sharp, metallic rattling sound cut cleanly through the deadly silence of the massive ballroom. He marched straight toward Diane to execute the official felony arrest warrant immediately. Diane stared at the cold steel, paralyzed by sheer mounting terror. She took a frantic, stumbling step backward and bumped violently into the melting ice sculpture. The freezing water splashed wildly across her expensive custom emerald dress. Total desperate panic fully consumed her entirely wicked and treacherous mind. She rapidly raised her shaking right arm and pointed her manicured finger directly at her own daughter. She screamed loudly with absolute hysterical venom to desperately save herself. It was her. Jasmine authorized the massive $450,000 wire transfer. The ultimate betrayal began now. The sudden violent accusation hanging in the ballroom air shattered the remaining composure of Diane and her secret lover. He did not wait to defend his wealthy mistress. He immediately abandoned her to face the advancing federal marshal alone. He spun around and sprinted toward the heavy brass service doors located at the rear of the grand venue. He intended to slip quietly into the dark alleyway and disappear into the bustling city streets with his offshore fortune. He crashed through the swinging doors with desperate, frantic energy. Two towering uniformed police officers stepped directly out of the deep shadows and blocked his entire escape route. They crossed their muscular arms and stared down at his pale, sweating face. He froze, completely trapped between the armed authorities and the luxurious ballroom he just fled. Mitchell walked calmly toward the rear exit. His leather dress shoes clicked sharply against the polished marble floor. He carried a thick, heavy banking dossier tucked neatly under his right arm. He approached the terrified man with a cold, grim smile stretching across his face. He knew exactly what this coward planned to do tonight. Mitchell pulled a crisp, printed document from the top of the stack. He held the paper directly in front of the shaking man. The document contained the highly classified routing numbers for the offshore corporate shell account. The lover swallowed hard and took a shaky step backward away from the armed officers. He assumed his digital tracks were completely invisible. He believed he successfully conned a foolish old man and his greedy, oblivious wife. He planned to board a private charter flight to the Cayman Islands before midnight. Mitchell shattered that arrogant delusion instantly. He informed the sweating coward that federal agents were currently waiting at the private airstrip to impound his chartered jet. He systematically dismantled the entire escape plan with absolute ruthless precision. The lover realized his brilliant financial theft was completely exposed. He possessed absolutely no remaining leverage and zero avenues for escape. The heavy steel trap closed tightly around his neck tonight, ending his freedom permanently today. Mitchell tapped the thick banking dossier firmly against his left palm. He locked his dark eyes onto the trembling man and delivered the final crushing blow to his pathetic illusion of wealth. He revealed the absolute genius of the invisible snare we constructed entirely in the shadows. He explained that my $450,000 never actually reached the sunny shores of the Cayman Islands. The lover gasped loudly and shook his head in pure, terrified denial. He insisted he personally executed the offshore wire transfer manually. He claimed he watched the digital confirmation clear the corporate portal. Mitchell smiled coldly and shattered his remaining confidence. I established an impenetrable secondary security protocol 10 complete years ago when I originally deposited my hard-earned municipal retirement funds. I mandated a physical biometric signature verification for any outgoing wire transfer exceeding $10,000. I engineered the financial fortress to withstand exactly this type of sophisticated domestic theft. When Diane utilized Jasmine and her corporate shell account to process the initial massive withdrawal, she unknowingly triggered a silent internal banking alarm. The massive corporate banking algorithm instantly flagged the catastrophic signature mismatch during the secondary routing phase. The system detected the digital anomaly and immediately aborted the offshore transmission. The bank froze the entire $450,000 inside an inaccessible domestic holding account pending a full federal fraud investigation. The lover stole absolutely nothing tonight. He possessed zero actual leverage and zero offshore funds. He sacrificed his entire freedom for a completely phantom fortune. He stared at the printed document in Mitchell in his hands with absolute profound despair. He realized he orchestrated an incredibly complex international felony conspiracy simply to trap himself inside a concrete prison cell. He played a brilliant tactical game against an opponent who completely controlled the entire board from the very beginning. The two towering uniformed police officers stepped forward simultaneously and grabbed his arms with brutal, unyielding force. They shoved him roughly against the heavy brass service doors and secured his wrists behind his back. The sharp clicking sound of the heavy steel handcuffs locking perfectly into place echoed through the corridor. The lover closed his eyes and wept silently as his entire stolen future completely evaporated into absolute nothingness right now, today, permanently, forever. He finally understood his complete defeat was absolutely irreversible and utterly final in every single possible way. Jasmine watched the horrific spectacle unfold with wide, terrified eyes. The catastrophic reality of Diane and her wicked betrayal slammed directly into her chest. She yanked her expensive smartphone from her silk designer clutch. She desperately opened her private corporate banking application with her violently shaking fingers. She rapidly entered her secure passwords, praying the massive financial disaster represented a massive misunderstanding. The bright digital screen illuminated her pale, sweating face. Every single active corporate account showed a massive, staggering negative balance. Diane completely drained every last available cent before attempting her offshore flight. Jasmine gasped loudly and dropped the expensive phone directly onto the polished marble floor. The heavy glass screen spiderwebbed instantly into 1,000 jagged pieces. The surrounding wealthy elite investors witnessed her absolute, complete mental collapse. They heard the devastating federal fraud allegations echoing clearly across the dead-silent ballroom. The high society guests realized their enormous personal investments funded a completely fabricated criminal enterprise. A sudden, furious uproar erupted throughout the entire venue. The furious billionaires aggressively surrounded Jasmine, completely blocking her only available exit path. They loudly demanded the immediate return of their massive financial contributions. They screamed furious threats of relentless civil litigation and permanent absolute social ruin. Jasmine shrank violently away from their incredibly loud, screaming faces. She possessed absolutely zero capital to properly satisfy their completely furious demands. Her brilliant independent company operated purely as a pathetic hollow shell. She finally realized her own mother engineered her total permanent destruction to secure a private tropical escape. Jasmine stood completely exposed without a single protective shield remaining. The glittering launch party officially transformed into an absolute suffocating nightmare. She sobbed uncontrollably while the completely furious, angry mob continuously tightened their highly aggressive circle around her ruined, completely destroyed life today right now. Jasmine stumbled frantically through the vicious, encroaching mob and crashed heavily onto her bare knees. She reached out with trembling, manicured hands and forcefully grabbed the sharp black fabric of my tailored pant leg. She completely abandoned her arrogant pride and desperately begged me for an immediate financial bailout right now. She promised to change her cruel ways and begged for my ultimate mercy tonight. I did not move a single muscle to assist her. I stood perfectly rigid and stared coldly down at her pathetic, crying face. I felt absolutely zero remaining pity for her devastating self-inflicted destruction. I delivered the final crushing truth with absolute freezing clarity. Your house was foreclosed by the bank at 8 a.m. today, and Bradley holds sole custody of your son. Her horrified screaming cries echoed endlessly across the massive ballroom as my total vengeance finalized completely today, permanently, forever, right now. Bradley stood tall beside the federal marshal. He looked completely unrecognizable from the defeated, broken man Jasmine had relentlessly tormented for the past 5 years. He possessed a cold, calculating calmness that perfectly mirrored my own deliberate transformation. He stepped forward and looked down at his sobbing wife. She remained crumpled on the polished marble floor, desperately clutching the hem of my tailored trousers. Bradley reached inside his tailored suit jacket and retrieved a thick, heavy legal envelope. He did not hand it to her with any remaining shred of affection or courtesy. He simply opened his fingers and let the dense package drop directly onto the floor. The heavy paper slapped against the Italian marble with a sharp, authoritative crack. Jasmine jumped violently at the sudden noise. She stared at the thick brown envelope as if it contained a venomous snake. Bradley spoke with a deep, resonant voice, completely devoid of any emotional hesitation. He informed her that the envelope contained his official finalized divorce filings. He explicitly stated that a Supreme Court judge had reviewed his emergency petition exactly at 8 this morning. He did not stutter or waver. He announced that the judge granted him immediate and permanent sole physical and legal custody of their young son. Jasmine gasped for air and shook her head in rapid, panicked denial. She reached out with trembling, manicured fingers and tore the envelope open. The crisp, white legal document spilled out across the floor. She frantically scanned the bold, black text, searching for a single loophole or a microscopic mistake. She found absolutely nothing. Every single page contained ironclad legal decrees signed directly by the highest municipal authority. The official stamps burned entirely through her pathetic remaining delusions. She realized she possessed absolutely no legal right to even approach her own child. Bradley had executed a flawless preemptive strike while she busily paraded around this fake corporate launch party. She looked up at the man she severely underestimated and finally recognized the absolute totality of her devastating failure. She had lost her very beautiful house and son completely. Jasmine scrambled frantically backward across the polished floor, attempting to escape the crushing weight of her immediate, terrifying reality. She screamed wildly, asserting the divorce filings were completely fraudulent and legally invalid. She desperately threatened to immediately contact the authorities and file severe domestic violence charges against her husband. She promised to completely ruin his personal reputation and permanently obliterate his professional career forever. She shrieked that no judge would ever grant sole custody to an abusive, unstable monster like him. Bradley remained entirely unfazed by her hysterical, theatrical performance. He reached into his suit jacket a second time and withdrew a sleek digital tablet. He tapped the glowing screen twice and raised the device for the entire high society crowd to clearly witness. A crystal-clear high-definition video began playing instantly. The footage displayed Jasmine lounging intimately inside a luxurious downtown hotel suite with one of her wealthy male investors. She laughed wickedly into the hidden camera while openly bragging about her upcoming divorce strategy. Her own recorded voice echoed loudly across the completely silent ballroom. She gleefully detailed her exact sinister plan to physically bruise her own arms and subsequently fabricate horrific domestic abuse allegations against Bradley. She explicitly bragged that the false criminal charges would perfectly guarantee her total financial victory during the brutal custody battle. Jasmine stared at the playing video with absolute mind-numbing horror. Bradley did not stop his relentless, systematic destruction. He swiped across the glowing screen and projected an endless series of incredibly damning high-resolution photographs. The vivid images documented her multiple secret affairs with various affluent corporate clients spanning the past 3 consecutive years. The undeniable photographic evidence definitively proved her absolute continuous moral bankruptcy. Her entire meticulously constructed image of a dedicated, devoted wife shattered into a million jagged pieces right before their eyes. The wealthy elite guests whispered loudly among themselves, pointing disgusted fingers directly at her trembling figure. She realized she possessed zero remaining leverage to manipulate the devastating situation. Her vicious, cruel threats were entirely neutralized by the absolute, undeniable truth staring back at her. She had willingly handed her husband the exact ironclad ammunition required to completely and permanently annihilate her entire existence tonight. She possessed absolutely nowhere left to hide from the devastating public exposure of her profound, ultimate betrayal. Every single person inside the massive, luxurious ballroom finally witnessed her monstrous personality. Bradley did not shed a single tear for the absolute destruction of his highly toxic marriage. He stood completely motionless, observing the pathetic, sniveling woman crying at his expensive leather shoes. He felt absolutely zero lingering affection or microscopic pity for her self-inflicted catastrophic misery. He had spent 5 incredibly painful years enduring her relentless psychological torture and extreme emotional manipulation. He finally reclaimed his stolen dignity and secured his innocent son away from her vicious, poisonous influence permanently. He calmly lowered the glowing digital tablet and slid the device safely back inside his dark suit jacket. He did not utter another single word to the weeping, ruined woman sprawling across the polished marble floor. He executed a sharp, precise turn and completely turned his broad back against his devastated wife. He marched steadily toward my position near the massive oak entrance doors. He walked with the towering, supreme confidence of a man entirely liberated from his darkest, heavy chains. He stopped directly beside my right shoulder and mirrored my perfect, rigid posture. We stood shoulder to shoulder, forming an impenetrable human wall against the wicked women who gleefully attempted to destroy our lives. 2 violently betrayed men finally stood entirely united inside the massive smoking wreckage of their former domestic abusers. We successfully executed a perfectly orchestrated retaliation against their incredible greed and massive criminal arrogance. We reclaimed our stolen power and completely dominated the entire battlefield today. Jasmine wailed loudly behind us, pleading hopelessly for a miraculous second chance that would absolutely never arrive. Bradley ignored her pathetic screeching cries entirely. He simply focused his cold, intense gaze forward and watched the remaining federal authorities systematically dismantle the final crumbling pillars of their fake, glamorous empire. We shared a profound, silent understanding forged through our mutual blistering, agonizing suffering. We survived the absolute worst betrayal imaginable, completely victorious together tonight. The 2 uniformed police officers stepped forward with heavy steel handcuffs. They aggressively secured Diane and Jasmine while loudly reciting their official Miranda rights into the dead-silent ballroom. The devastating reality of their immediate federal incarceration fully crashed down upon the wicked mother and daughter. Diane sobbed uncontrollably, while Jasmine stared blankly at the cold, polished marble floor in absolute total defeat. The arrogant lover watched the dramatic arrests unfold from the periphery. He calmly straightened his expensive charcoal suit and dusted off his jacket sleeves. He flashed a smug, confident smirk toward the federal marshal. He slowly shook his head and projected absolute, pure arrogance. "You have absolutely nothing on me tonight. I am merely an independent corporate financial consultant. I never officially signed a single damn thing." I stepped straight forward from the human wall and locked my intense gaze directly onto his eyes. "Actually, you did." Segment 13.1, The Hidden Trapdoor. The smug grin clinging to the face of the arrogant financial consultant completely vanished the moment I challenged his confident declaration. I did not waste my breath engaging in a petty verbal argument with a cornered thief. I simply raised my right hand and delivered a sharp, precise physical signal directly to Mitchell. My brilliant legal strategist nodded in perfect silent understanding. He reached deep inside his thick black leather folder for the 3rd consecutive time tonight. He retrieved a heavy stack of official real estate documents secured by a thick silver binding clip. He held the dense paperwork high in the air for everyone inside the massive ballroom to witness clearly. The lover stared at the thick white pages with a sudden expression of genuine deep confusion. Mitchell stepped directly toward the trembling man and forcefully pressed the heavy legal packet right against his expensive charcoal suit jacket. He explained the absolute reality of the situation with cold, mechanical precision. He reminded the corrupt consultant about the highly secretive private meeting he attended yesterday afternoon. He detailed how the arrogant thief confidently signed a massive stack of expedited closing documents to quietly purchase my sprawling luxury estate. The man assumed he possessed an airtight backdoor arrangement to acquire my incredibly valuable property at a severely corrupted 60% discount. He fully believed he manipulated the corrupt appraiser and bypassed every single federal luxury property tax completely. He completely ignored the fundamental rule of conducting high-level corporate theft. He eagerly put his actual physical signature in blue ink across multiple binding financial contracts. Mitchell flipped to the very last page of the heavy stack and pointed a long, manicured finger directly at the bottom line. The undeniable physical proof stared right back at the terrified criminal. His distinct, bold signature sat perfectly legible upon the crisp white parchment. The absolute, undeniable physical evidence of his massive criminal fraud existed directly inside the tight grip of my brilliant attorney right now. The inescapable reality of his immediate federal prosecution finally crushed his pathetic remaining defiant attitude entirely today, right now. Segment 13.2, The Financial Guillotine. I stepped closer to the paralyzed consultant and delivered the ultimate, final, lethal revelation. I spoke clearly, deliberately, ensuring every single wealthy party guest completely heard the absolute devastating truth. I explained that I never actually owned the massive, sprawling luxury estate under my personal individual name. I established a highly classified, irrevocable blind trust perfectly shielding the entire massive property almost a decade ago. The greedy, arrogant lover signed his illegal, heavily discounted real estate purchase agreement directly with that deeply hidden corporate entity. I constructed an absolute flawless financial guillotine perfectly disguised as a standard boilerplate contractual transaction. Mitchell gleefully outlined the incredibly specific ironclad penalty clause buried deep inside the fine print of the lengthy closing documents. The heavily fortified legal stipulation explicitly dictated that any proven documented federal fraud associated with the real estate transaction immediately voided the entire property sale instantly. The brilliant contractual trap did not simply cancel the illegal transfer of the expensive estate. It officially empowered the blind trust to legally seize any initial earnest financial deposits as permanent, absolute, non-refundable penalty damages. The cowardly financial strategist stared blankly at Mitchell, struggling violently to fully comprehend the massive, catastrophic implication of his incredibly stupid signature. He had desperately, eagerly transferred exactly $100,000 into the holding account to securely finalize his corrupt, fraudulent property purchase yesterday afternoon. He firmly believed the enormous cash deposit represented a completely brilliant, necessary temporary investment to steal millions. I smiled coldly and informed him the massive, irrevocable trust officially absorbed his entire massive cash payment permanently at exactly 7 a.m. this morning. The sophisticated, heavily guarded offshore money he meticulously hoarded throughout his entire pathetic criminal career vanished completely. The completely silent ballroom watched his ultimate total financial execution unfold with absolute, pure, horrible fascination. He played a massive, incredibly dangerous, high-stakes digital poker game against an absolute master architect. He confidently bet his entire total financial freedom and completely lost every single valuable chip he possessed. The incredibly brutal reality of his absolute poverty completely shattered his arrogant, manipulative mind right now. The thick black leather folder held his ultimate doom. His entire fake, wealthy identity burned into useless, toxic ashes tonight. He stood completely broken and entirely defenseless before the very man he blindly attempted to easily rob. The structural foundation of his wicked existence dissolved into pure, absolute nothingness forever. Segment 13.3, Total Ruin. The devastating final realization of his complete, absolute bankruptcy crashed directly down upon his sweating, trembling shoulders. He instantaneously lost every single hard-earned penny he hoarded throughout his entire miserable, deceitful lifetime. The spectacular, blinding flash of total, unmitigated ruin immediately shattered his remaining fragile sanity tonight. He completely abandoned his smooth, sophisticated facade and surrendered entirely to pure, absolute animalistic fury. He let out a piercing, aggressive, guttural scream that echoed violently across the massive, silent ballroom. He lunged directly forward with extreme, desperate physical aggression, aiming his heavy, clenched fists directly at my chest. He intended to physically destroy the absolute master architect who flawlessly orchestrated his permanent total execution today. I did not move a single defensive muscle or retreat a single protective step backward. I stood perfectly still and simply watched his pathetic violent charge unfold with absolute icy detachment. The towering, imposing federal marshal reacted with breathtaking, incredible lightning speed. He stepped swiftly sideways and intercepted the charging, desperate criminal with absolutely devastating physical force. He drove his heavy, muscular shoulder completely through the center of the arrogant man. The brutal tactical tackle sent the screaming consultant flying violently through the crisp ballroom air. He crashed heavily face first directly onto the incredibly hard, polished Italian marble floor. His nose shattered instantly with a sickening, loud, crunching crack. The heavy federal marshal dropped his massive knee directly into the middle of his ruined back, pinning him securely against the cold stone. He grabbed his bleeding wrists and aggressively ratcheted the tight, heavy steel handcuffs securely into their final locked position. The powerful federal officer loudly announced the immediate addition of an aggravated felony assault charge directly onto his already massive, sprawling criminal indictment. His entire dark, greedy existence concluded right here completely permanently tonight. Segment 13.4, The Hook. The massive glittering spectacle officially ended inside the completely silent hotel ballroom. The thoroughly defeated criminals remained securely chained exactly where they violently fell tonight. Bradley and I executed a sharp synchronized turn and walked away from the total permanent wreckage of their extremely pathetic lives. We marched steadily through the grand double doors and stepped smoothly out into the crisp, cool evening air. The bustling downtown city streets offered a perfectly refreshing contrast to the absolute toxic poison festering inside that massive venue. We stood together upon the quiet concrete sidewalk, completely liberated from our incredibly dark, heavy burdens. My encrypted cell phone suddenly vibrated aggressively inside my dark, tailored suit jacket pocket. I retrieved the illuminated digital device and answered the incoming call immediately. The automated robotic voice identified the local county jail booking facility. Diane desperately demanded an immediate private face-to-face meeting right now today. The harsh fluorescent lights of the county detention center buzzed with a relentless mechanical hum the following morning. I walked through the heavy steel security doors and entered the completely sterile concrete visiting room. The oppressive environment smelled faintly of industrial bleach and deeply ingrained despair. I sat down heavily on the cold metal folding chair bolted permanently to the gray floor. I stared straight ahead through the thick, smudged plexiglass divider separating the free world from the incarcerated. The heavy, reinforced door on the opposite side of the transparent wall clicked open with a loud, echoing metallic thud. A stern female corrections officer escorted my wife into the tiny, confined booth. Diane shuffled forward with short, restricted steps. The absolute physical transformation she underwent overnight was completely staggering. She looked incredibly ragged and entirely stripped of her previous overwhelming arrogance. The expensive designer emerald gown and the heavy gold jewelry were completely gone. She wore a bright orange canvas prison jumpsuit that hung loosely off her trembling shoulders. Her perfectly styled hair hung in greasy, tangled strands around her pale face. The expensive floral perfume she always wore was entirely replaced by the stale, sour stench of a sleepless, terrifying night spent inside a holding cell. The heavy cosmetic makeup she applied like war paint was completely washed away, revealing the deep, harsh wrinkles framing her panicked brown eyes. She slumped down onto the metal stool directly across from me. She picked up the black plastic intercom receiver with violently shaking hands. Her wrists bore the dark, angry red marks from the tight steel handcuffs the federal marshal applied yesterday evening. I slowly lifted my own receiver and pressed the cold plastic against my right ear. I looked directly into the terrified eyes of the woman who spent the last 40 years sleeping quietly beside me. She no longer projected the supreme, arrogant confidence of a brilliant, untouchable criminal mastermind. She simply looked like a broken, pathetic, completely defeated prisoner facing the absolute total destruction of her entire remaining natural lifespan today, right here and right now this morning. Diane pressed the heavy black receiver tightly against her pale, trembling cheek. Thick, desperate tears immediately welled up inside her exhausted brown eyes and spilled freely down her face. She launched directly into her absolute, final, pathetic attempt at extreme emotional manipulation. She sobbed loudly through the static connection and desperately begged for my immediate unconditional forgiveness today. She deliberately weaponized our 40 complete years of sacred marriage to violently guilt me into stopping her impending federal prosecution. She cried hysterically, reminding me about the incredibly difficult early days we spent building our massive fortune completely from scratch. She painted a highly fabricated, romanticized picture of our shared brutal poverty and our mutual agonizing struggles. She claimed she distinctly remembered the countless freezing winter nights we spent practically starving inside our tiny, freezing first apartment building. She insisted those deeply painful shared sacrifices forged an unbreakable, eternal bond between our souls. She desperately tried to convince me her current horrific criminal betrayal somehow stemmed directly from a deeply misguided sense of fierce maternal protection. She lied through her teeth, stating she only orchestrated the massive offshore theft to permanently secure a massive, untouchable financial legacy for Jasmine. She swore she simply wanted our only daughter to completely avoid the crushing, agonizing poverty we mutually endured during our absolute hardest formative years. She wept pathetically, claiming she truly loved me deeply and never actually wanted the corrupt appraiser or her secret lover to cause me any real physical harm. She practically choked on her own desperate sobbing tears, begging me to contact Mitchell and officially drop every single devastating federal charge immediately. She promised to completely return every single stolen cent and swear absolute total loyalty to me forever if I simply opened the heavy steel jail doors today. She pleaded for my ultimate mercy, utilizing every single psychological trigger she actively collected over 4 continuous decades. Her pathetic wailing voice echoed loudly through the small plastic speaker vibrating against my right ear. She genuinely believed her intense theatrical weeping could magically erase the absolute, incredibly toxic reality of her highly sophisticated felony treason. She assumed my historical blind devotion still existed somewhere deep inside my completely shattered, healing heart right now, while she sat completely trapped behind the thick, dirty glass window facing a terrifying, bleak future, completely isolated from her former glamorous, wealthy lifestyle forever and ever right now. I sat perfectly motionless and listened to her frantic, desperate weeping in absolute profound silence. I did not interrupt her elaborate theatrical monologue or offer a single shred of emotional comfort. I allowed her to completely exhaust her entire pathetic arsenal of psychological manipulation. When her desperate sobbing finally dissolved into heavy, ragged breathing, I spoke into the black plastic receiver with absolute freezing clarity. I completely dismantled her incredibly foolish defense, utilizing undeniable concrete facts. I coldly reminded her that we stopped starving inside that freezing apartment nearly 35 years ago. I bluntly stated her massive federal crime stemmed entirely from her own relentless, insatiable personal greed. She did not attempt to steal my sprawling estate to protect our adult daughter from imagined future poverty. She ruthlessly orchestrated my total mental destruction strictly to permanently secure her own luxurious tropical lifestyle with her secret hidden lover. I pointed out the absolute, undeniable truth that she willingly sacrificed my entire physical health and my total emotional well-being simply to completely avoid paying standard government luxury taxes. She did not act out of fierce maternal devotion or lingering marital affection. She operated as a cold, calculating mercenary completely devoid of any remaining human empathy. I explicitly told her that 40 years of marriage meant absolutely nothing the exact second she happily paraded that corrupt appraiser through my living room. Her tears were entirely fake and completely self-serving. She wept solely because her brilliant, invincible criminal empire violently collapsed around her head. She mourned her lost massive fortune and her stolen absolute freedom, not our completely shattered relationship. I stared directly through the smudge-thick plexiglass and watched her totally absorb her absolute, permanent, ultimate defeat alone today, right now, forever, entirely, completely, without any single remaining hope today. Diane stared at my completely unyielding expression with absolute horror. She finally realized her massive manipulation failed completely. She dropped the heavy black receiver onto the metal counter. She buried her pale, weeping face deep inside her trembling palms and sobbed hysterically. I stood up from the cold metal folding chair with perfect rigid posture. I adjusted my sharp, custom-tailored black suit jacket smoothly. I possessed absolutely no remaining emotional connection to this completely broken, treacherous woman. I turned my broad back toward the thick, smudged plexiglass divider, preparing to walk directly out of her utterly ruined life, permanently, forever right now. I stopped moving and turned around. I reached down and picked up the black plastic intercom phone one final last time. "Enjoy your stay, Diane. Oh, and the IRS was definitely notified about your secret offshore accounts. You owe them $2 million in back taxes today. The heavy steel door on the opposite side of the thick plexiglass divider clicked open for a second consecutive time. Diane was physically escorted out of the small concrete visiting booth by the stern female corrections officer. A brief heavy silence settled over the sterile interrogation room before the metal door swung open again. Jasmine shuffled slowly into the confined space and collapsed onto the cold metal stool. She replaced her mother with a completely broken and entirely pathetic physical demeanor. Her former absolute arrogance and extreme vanity were entirely obliterated today. She no longer wore the stunning crimson designer gown she proudly paraded around her glittering corporate launch party. She wore the exact same bright orange standard-issue canvas prison jumpsuit as her mother. The oversized fabric hung loosely over her violently trembling frame. Her perfectly manicured nails were chipped and her expensive hair extensions looked completely ragged. She lifted the heavy black plastic intercom receiver with shaking hands and pressed it desperately against her pale face. Thick tears immediately began streaming down her cheeks. She stared at me through the smudged barrier and immediately started begging for my ultimate forgiveness. She wept loudly through the static connection and desperately pleaded for me to drop the devastating federal charges against her. She completely abandoned her fiercely independent corporate visionary persona and instantly reverted to playing a helpless, confused child. She completely weaponized her tears and violently blamed her mother for every single criminal action she executed. She claimed Diane aggressively brainwashed her into participating in the massive offshore wire fraud and the fake domestic violence scheme against Bradley. She insisted she never actually wanted to steal my retirement funds or destroy her husband. She swore she was merely a naive, innocent pawn trapped inside her mother and her sophisticated, wicked manipulation. She desperately begged me to remember the little girl I raised and begged me to rescue her from this absolute, terrifying concrete nightmare. I sat perfectly still and stared directly into her panicked, crying eyes without showing a single microscopic shred of remaining human empathy right here today. I cut off her pathetic, weeping monologue with absolute merciless precision. I spoke into the black plastic receiver and completely dismantled her utterly ridiculous victim narrative right now. I explicitly refused to allow her to blame Diane for her own deliberate, independent adult actions. I reminded her with freezing clarity that she actively chose to participate in every single aspect of this massive criminal conspiracy. I systematically outlined her exact specific choices to completely annihilate her fabricated innocence today. I bluntly stated that Diane did not physically force her to log into the corporate portal and manually authorize the massive $450,000 offshore wire transfer. She typed those secure passwords with her own greedy, eager fingers. I reminded her that Diane did not force her into that luxurious downtown hotel suite with her wealthy investors. She willingly engaged in multiple secret affairs and gleefully recorded her own twisted confession regarding the fake domestic abuse allegations against Bradley. She actively planned to violently bruise her own arms and completely destroy her innocent husband to secure a massive unearned financial divorce settlement. I stared through the thick glass and reminded her about the countless times she openly mocked my existence right at my own dining room table. She sat inside the home I built with 40 years of backbreaking municipal labor and actively laughed at my supposed cognitive decline. She treated my completely fabricated medical deterioration as a highly amusing inconvenience rather than a devastating family tragedy. She aggressively demanded I be locked away inside a sterile state care facility simply so she could quickly liquidate my valuable property to fund her pathetic, hollow corporate shell company. I told her that a truly innocent pawn does not aggressively celebrate the complete total destruction of her own father. I stripped away every single remaining layer of her cowardly defense, utilizing absolute, undeniable concrete facts. She possessed absolute free will, and she consistently utilized that freedom to choose extreme, unadulterated selfishness over basic human decency every single time. She actively orchestrated her own catastrophic downfall by embracing pure greed and absolute incredible arrogance. I completely refused to validate her entirely fake, manipulative tears today. She built her own personal prison completely brick by brick, entirely by herself. She must accept the absolutely permanent consequences of her incredibly dark, unforgivable betrayals without any remaining sympathy today, right now, from me, absolutely whatsoever. Jasmine stared at me through the smudged plexiglass with wide, terrified eyes. She finally realized her manipulative tears held absolutely zero power over me anymore. I completely ignored her silent, hyperventilating panic and prepared to deliver the ultimate final blow to her entirely ruined existence. I spoke with a deep, resonant voice that left no possible room for future negotiation or legal misinterpretation. I explicitly informed her that I was permanently and entirely severing all remaining financial and familial ties between us right now. I announced that Mitchell had officially restructured my entire massive estate portfolio early this morning. I completely removed her name from every single existing blind trust and permanent legal will. She would absolutely never receive a single microscopic fraction of my accumulated wealth. I guaranteed that she would inherit absolutely zero assets, zero property, and zero corporate stock when my natural lifespan eventually concluded. Her entire future financial security was officially eradicated completely from existence today. I explicitly stated that she would face the devastating federal fraud charges, and Bradley and his incredibly aggressive divorce proceedings entirely alone, without a single penny of my personal financial assistance. I completely refused to ever post her incredibly massive bail or fund her expensive criminal defense attorneys. She violently chose to absolutely destroy our sacred familial bond the exact moment she eagerly authorized that illegal offshore wire transfer. She completely surrendered her rightful position as my beloved daughter to become a pathetic, opportunistic thief. I told her she must now permanently navigate the incredibly brutal consequences of her extreme arrogance entirely by herself. She officially possessed absolutely nothing remaining in this world today, forever. I felt pure, unadulterated relief that my nightmare finally concluded entirely today, right now, completely forever and always without any question, permanently starting today immediately. I stood up from the cold metal folding chair with perfect rigid posture. Jasmine immediately broke down into absolute total hysteria. She slammed her shackled hands against the thick plexiglass, screaming violently for my absolute unconditional forgiveness. Two heavily armed correctional officers rapidly entered the small concrete booth and forcefully pulled her thrashing body away from the divider. I completely ignored her pathetic, agonizing wails and turned my broad back toward the glass permanently. I walked steadily out of the sterile detention facility into the bright, warm morning sunlight. Mitchell stood perfectly still, leaning against the sleek black town car, waiting patiently for my arrival. He did not smile or offer a standard professional greeting today. He looked directly at me with absolute grim intensity. We definitely have a massive problem. Diane and her public defender just filed an emergency federal motion to completely suppress the hidden audio recording today. The heavy glass doors of Mitchell and his private law firm closed securely behind us, entirely sealing away the chaotic morning. We walked directly into his massive corner office overlooking the sprawling downtown financial district. We did not waste a single valuable second celebrating the devastating emotional destruction of my treacherous daughter. The sudden, aggressive legal maneuver from Diane and her desperate public defender demanded our absolute, immediate, focused attention. Mitchell gestured toward the long, polished mahogany conference table dominating the center of the room. A massive stack of highly classified financial documents sat perfectly organized across the gleaming wooden surface. We immediately began the rigorous, grueling process of completely restructuring my entire extensive asset portfolio. Mitchell operated with breathtaking legal precision, utilizing every single sophisticated loophole he mastered over 3 decades of corporate litigation. We systematically dismantled the original vulnerable financial structures Diane previously attempted to illegally manipulate. We officially transferred every single remaining municipal bond and lucrative offshore investment directly into a newly established impenetrable fortress of irrevocable blind trusts. Mitchell drafted incredibly complex, ironclad legal barriers specifically designed to permanently repel any future frivolous civil claims. We absolutely ensured that neither Diane nor Jasmine could ever access a single microscopic fraction of my accumulated wealth under any possible theoretical circumstance. I carefully signed my name across dozens of crisp white pages, locking my massive fortune away behind thick legal titanium walls. We established an incredibly rigid secondary biometric verification protocol for any future monetary withdrawals exceeding $1,000. The dense, intricate paperwork guaranteed my complete financial independence, completely immune to any future malicious domestic interference. I sat back in the heavy leather chair and felt an immense, profound sense of absolute structural security. My hard-earned financial legacy was finally permanently shielded from the toxic, parasitic greed that previously infected my entire household. Mitchell gathered the fully executed documents and locked them securely inside his massive fireproof steel wall safe. We successfully constructed an absolute impenetrable financial perimeter, completely cutting off their lifeblood permanently forever today, right now, this exact, specific, isolated morning, without failing today. Mitchell withdrew a second distinct pile of crisp, unblemished legal papers from his thick leather briefcase. He arranged the pristine documents perfectly across the dark mahogany table, directly in front of my heavy leather chair. I picked up my favorite gold fountain pen and examined the brilliant strategic initiative we secretly developed over the past 3 incredibly difficult weeks. The paperwork legally finalized the immediate establishment of a massive, heavily funded independent charitable foundation. I deliberately dedicated a staggering $20 million of my newly protected personal fortune specifically toward this highly targeted, righteous mission. The entire comprehensive organization existed solely to aggressively, fiercely protect vulnerable elderly citizens from experiencing catastrophic, devastating familial financial abuse. I personally suffered through the absolute worst psychological manipulation imaginable at the deeply corrupt hands of my own treacherous, greedy family. I absolutely refused to ever allow another innocent, trusting senior citizen to helplessly endure that exact same agonizing systemic destruction. The incredibly robust foundation would completely legally finance highly aggressive, skilled corporate attorneys and elite private investigators to ruthlessly pursue abusive, predatory relatives nationwide. I rapidly signed my physical signature across the bottom of 7 consecutive binding administrative contracts establishing the monumental philanthropic entity today. I calmly set the heavy gold pen down upon the gleaming table and turned my focused, intense attention directly toward my loyal, dedicated ally. Bradley sat quietly across the long wooden table, projecting a calm, steady, profound resilience. I spoke with a deep, resonant voice, completely filled with absolute, genuine, unwavering respect. I officially appointed Bradley as the supreme managing director of the entire massive $20 million charitable foundation right now. I explicitly handed him absolute total executive authority over the entire enormous operational budget and every single major strategic corporate decision forever. He stared directly at the freshly signed documents with wide, absolutely astonished eyes, struggling to fully process the massive, immense responsibility I just happily handed him completely today, right now. He genuinely deserved this incredibly powerful, massive second chance completely today, right now, immediately. He previously lost his entire personal professional identity, battling his incredibly vicious, manipulative ex-wife through brutal family courts. I completely restored his stolen corporate authority and firmly anchored his bright, promising future right alongside my own highly righteous crusade forever. We stood completely united against the devastating systemic domestic evil currently destroying countless innocent, vulnerable lives everywhere today without hesitation. I smoothly slid a thick, pristine architectural blueprint directly across the polished mahogany table toward Bradley. He instinctively reached out and gently touched the heavy textured paper with his long, incredibly steady fingers. His eyes widened slightly as he slowly examined the complex structural grid printed across the massive wide page. I smiled warmly and formally presented my absolute ultimate personal request to him today. I explicitly tasked him with designing and constructing the entire central operational headquarters for our brand new massive philanthropic foundation right now. I completely refused to hire any random detached corporate architectural firm to build our highly symbolic, righteous physical fortress. I demanded the absolute, unparalleled structural genius of a man who possessed a beautifully profound, intimate understanding of our incredibly sacred protective mission. Bradley stared directly at the intricate blank blueprint with a sudden, sharp, intense, creative focus completely illuminating his dark eyes. The heavy, suffocating dark shadow cast by his incredibly toxic, treacherous ex-wife finally fully evaporated from his broad shoulders permanently today. He previously spent 5 incredibly long, miserable years deliberately shrinking his massive, immense talents simply to avoid constantly triggering her extremely fragile, arrogant corporate ego. I deliberately handed him the absolute perfect, grand, monumental canvas required to completely unleash his incredibly brilliant, suppressed professional abilities immediately. He confidently picked up a heavy black drafting pencil and smoothly dragged the dark lead directly across the large, empty white space. I watched him effortlessly sketch a towering, brilliant conceptual archway perfectly symbolizing absolute unyielding protective strength today. I completely successfully restored his permanently shattered professional dignity and fully resurrected his massive dormant creative spirit today right now. We officially began constructing an incredibly beautiful, lasting physical legacy forged from our mutual agonizing survival and our shared unyielding ultimate victory today, forever. Mitchell suddenly raised his right hand directly toward the ceiling to abruptly halt our highly productive and deeply celebratory conversation completely today. His highly encrypted mobile cell phone vibrated violently against the heavy polished wooden table right now. He snatched the sleek digital device and rapidly scanned the incredibly urgent incoming electronic message from the downtown federal courthouse immediately. His previously relaxed and highly confident facial expression instantly hardened into a deeply grim, serious frown. The warm afternoon sunlight streaming through the massive glass windows abruptly felt completely freezing and entirely ominous right now. He slowly lowered the vibrating cell phone and looked directly into my waiting, intensely focused eyes today. He delivered the absolute terrifying legal update with incredibly chilling, absolute devastating clarity right now today. The trial starts Monday. The judge agreed to hear the motion to suppress the audio. If we lose the recording, Diane walks free. The heavy oak doors of the federal courthouse swung completely shut, sealing everyone inside the tense, suffocating atmosphere of the grand courtroom. The highly anticipated trial officially commenced promptly at 9 in the morning. Diane sat stiffly at the defense table wearing a drab gray suit that failed to hide her deep physical exhaustion and mounting terror. Her expensive high-profile public defender immediately stood up and launched a fiercely aggressive opening assault directly at the presiding judge. He boldly presented an emergency legal motion demanding the absolute total suppression of the critical audio recording captured inside my living room. He paced aggressively across the polished wooden floor, pointing a sharp, accusing finger directly at Mitchell and me. He loudly argued that the incredibly damning audio evidence was obtained completely illegally through malicious, unauthorized domestic wiretapping. He explicitly cited strict state and federal privacy statutes dictating that all recorded conversations legally require the active physical consent of at least one participating party. He passionately claimed that since I was entirely absent from the living room during their highly secretive, wicked plotting, I possessed absolutely no legal right to secretly monitor their private, personal dialogue. He aggressively insisted that Diane and Jasmine possessed a completely reasonable, absolute expectation of total privacy while conversing inside their own assumed primary residence. He dramatically accused me of orchestrating a highly invasive, malicious surveillance campaign designed specifically to entrap his vulnerable client through highly illegal electronic eavesdropping methods. He demanded the judge immediately strike the core foundational evidence from the official federal record permanently today. He confidently believed that eliminating this specific digital recording would instantly collapse the entire federal fraud conspiracy case against his treacherous client today. He concluded his passionate legal tirade with a highly arrogant, smug smirk directly toward our prosecution table, fully anticipating an immediate sweeping judicial victory. The entire packed courtroom remained completely dead silent, waiting anxiously for the judge to officially process the massive aggressive legal maneuver right now today, this exact specific lonely morning, without any single further unneeded delay or any lingering hesitation, absolutely right away, forever. Mitchell slowly stood up from the heavy wooden prosecution table, projecting absolute supreme confidence and completely unshakable lethal calmness. He buttoned his dark tailored suit jacket perfectly before addressing the extremely attentive federal judge today. He smoothly presented a massive, incredibly dense binder completely filled with absolute ironclad property law precedents and state security statutes. He methodically dismantled the defensive wiretapping argument utilizing brilliant, incredibly sharp legal precision. He loudly established the absolute undeniable fact that the massive sprawling estate was completely solely registered under my individual personal name. He explicitly proved that Diane possessed absolutely zero legal ownership rights or legitimate financial equity regarding the vast luxury property whatsoever. Mitchell flawlessly transitioned his brilliant argument toward the specific physical location of the hidden recording device. He vividly illustrated that the grand living room operated strictly as an open common area frequently utilized by numerous household guests and contracted domestic staff continuously. He argued flawlessly that no reasonable human being could possibly harbor any legitimate expectation of total absolute privacy while loudly conversing inside a massive central thoroughfare completely lacking physical doors or locks. He then systematically delivered the ultimate crushing legal blow to their pathetic, desperate suppression motion tonight. He presented official signed contracts clearly proving the hidden listening device operated as a fully registered integral component of a massive, comprehensive automated home security system. He firmly established that the entire advanced security network was legally purchased and professionally installed precisely due to my documented severe medical vulnerability and highly genuine safety concerns previously. He absolutely proved the system continuously recorded both video and audio data strictly to protect my personal physical safety inside my own exclusive property. Mitchell stared coldly directly at the trembling defense attorney and completely shattered his arrogant smirk forever today. He stated unequivocally that capturing their incredibly toxic, fraudulent confessions was simply an incredibly fortunate, completely legal byproduct of my standard defensive domestic security protocols. He passionately concluded his brilliant, flawless legal presentation, forcefully demanding the presiding federal judge officially admit the incredibly damning digital evidence into the permanent public record immediately. He confidently sat back down upon his heavy wooden chair, knowing he perfectly secured our absolute ultimate victory without displaying a single microscopic fraction of nervous hesitation right now, today, completely flawlessly and totally securely, forever in this massive courtroom, right now, standing perfectly tall, completely undefeated, absolutely always today, forever without fail. The presiding federal judge adjusted his heavy dark spectacles and firmly rejected the desperate defense motion instantly. He struck his heavy wooden gavel against the sounding block, completely officially overruling their pathetic, aggressive legal objection right now. He directly ordered the prosecution team to immediately play the highly disputed audio recording for the entire completely silent courtroom. Mitchell nodded sharply and pressed the glowing digital play button upon his sleek silver laptop. The crisp, high-definition audio violently shattered the absolute dead silence filling the massive grand chamber. Diane and Jasmine, completely arrogant and utterly cruel voices loudly echoed off the high-polished mahogany walls. The incredibly clear recording captured every single wicked, calculating syllable they gleefully whispered inside my sprawling estate. The packed courtroom collectively gasped, hearing them ruthlessly plot to falsely declare my absolute severe cognitive decline. They explicitly outlined their incredibly sinister plan to forcibly lock me inside a bleak, sterile psychiatric facility forever. Jasmine clearly bragged about fabricating horrifying false domestic abuse allegations to violently destroy her innocent husband during their massive high-stakes custody battle. Diane confidently detailed her exact complex strategy to completely illegally liquidate my massive personal fortune and secretly funnel the stolen wealth directly into untraceable offshore shell accounts. The undeniable absolute reality of their extreme total moral bankruptcy vibrated loudly through the state-of-the-art courtroom speaker system. The incredibly toxic, highly sophisticated criminal conspiracy unraveled completely publicly, revealing the absolute darkest depths of their boundless, unadulterated greed. The devastating recording finally finished playing, completely leaving the entire federal jury staring in pure, absolute, shell-shocked disbelief. The incredible, undeniable spoken evidence completely, entirely, permanently cemented their absolute, total, ultimate, catastrophic legal doom today, right here, inside this exact specific room right now, forever, completely, perfectly today, without failing completely. The 12-seated members of the federal jury slowly turned their incredibly cold, unforgiving eyes directly toward the ruined defense table right now. They stared at Diane and Jasmine with absolute, pure, unadulterated disgust, completely radiating from their furious, tight expressions. The highly treacherous, wicked women physically shrank violently away from the intensely judging, incredibly hostile glares, completely destroying their pathetic remaining cowardly composure today. The entire perfectly orchestrated illusion of their completely fake, glamorous, innocent, wealthy lifestyle fully evaporated into pure, absolute toxic smoke right before their completely terrified, crying eyes forever. The presiding judge swiftly lifted his heavy wooden gavel and aggressively struck the thick, dark-sounding block with extreme, intense, absolute judicial finality today right now. The sharp cracking noise violently echoed throughout the completely dead silent grand room forever right now. The jury will now deliberate. We will return with the verdict in exactly 1 hour. The heavy mahogany doors of the grand courtroom swung completely shut, sealing the federal jury inside their private deliberation chamber. Bradley and I walked silently out into the expansive marble corridor of the municipal courthouse. We did not pace nervously across the incredibly polished floors or engage in any meaningless, anxious chatter. We simply sat down heavily side by side upon a long, rigid wooden bench completely bathed in the cold, fluorescent light. The atmosphere surrounding us felt incredibly thick and utterly suffocating, but our physical postures remained perfectly straight and completely unyielding today. We shared a profound, absolute silence forged through years of enduring unbelievable psychological torture and massive financial betrayal. We simply waited for the vast, unfeeling universe to finally balance the incredibly heavy scales of absolute justice today, right now. I stared directly at the intricate mosaic patterns covering the courthouse wall across the incredibly quiet hall. My mind briefly flashed backward, remembering the terrifying freezing nights I spent alone inside a dark hospital room, fully believing my entire existence was violently ending. Diane had stood directly over my supposedly failing body, completely calculating the exact maximum monetary value of my absolute demise. She actively weaponized my temporary physical vulnerability to orchestrate a massive, incredibly devastating offshore financial theft. She entirely dismissed 4 complete decades of our shared marital history simply to fund a pathetic, luxurious tropical escape with a completely arrogant fake corporate consultant. Bradley sat completely motionless beside me, staring down at his incredibly steady hands resting perfectly upon his tailored trousers. He finally possessed sole absolute physical custody of his young, innocent son, completely, permanently, forever. He successfully shattered the massive, highly toxic psychological cage Jasmine aggressively constructed around him for 5 continuous, miserable years. We both entirely understood that this exact specific hour represented the absolute final, definitive chapter of our incredibly long, agonizing defensive war today, right now. A sharp metallic click suddenly echoed violently down the massive marble hallway, shattering the dead, heavy silence entirely. The stern, uniformed bailiff stepped swiftly out of the massive wooden doors and signaled us directly. We rapidly filed back inside the massive federal courtroom and resumed our rigid positions directly behind the prosecution table. The incredibly thick, suffocating tension completely dominated the enclosed airspace right now. Diane and Jasmine sat entirely frozen at the defense table, staring completely blankly at the highly polished mahogany surface. They looked absolutely tiny and completely stripped of their incredibly arrogant, incredibly toxic former glamorous personalities today. The presiding federal judge entered the grand chamber and violently struck his heavy wooden gavel perfectly against the dark-sounding block. He sternly commanded the entire courtroom to maintain absolute total silence, while the final official verdict was legally delivered. The designated jury foreman stood up slowly, holding a crisp white document containing the absolute ultimate destiny of the 2 incredibly wicked women. He cleared his throat loudly and began reading the definitive legal pronouncement with completely freezing absolute clarity right now today. He declared Diane completely, fully guilty on every single incredibly devastating federal charge presented during the grueling trial. The jury found her absolutely guilty of massive corporate wire fraud and incredibly malicious criminal conspiracy. They found her unequivocally guilty of severe targeted elder abuse and completely blatant, undeniable federal perjury. The foreman explicitly delivered the exact identical, completely devastating verdict directly against Jasmine right now. She was universally declared absolutely guilty of active, willing participation in the massive financial fraud and completely unyielding systemic familial abuse today inside this massive, specific courtroom. Diane let out a sharp, terrified gasp, while Jasmine completely collapsed forward, weeping violently onto her folded arms. The towering federal judge immediately took total control over the completely chaotic emotional scene. He completely refused to show either woman a single microscopic fraction of basic human mercy or standard legal leniency today. He explicitly cited their absolutely astounding lack of genuine remorse and their incredibly arrogant, highly destructive, manipulative behavior throughout the entire judicial proceeding. He slammed his heavy gavel downward and officially handed Diane an absolute maximum consecutive sentence of exactly 15 incredibly long, brutal years inside a maximum security federal penitentiary. He turned his extremely cold, judging gaze directly toward Jasmine and officially sentenced her to serve exactly 8 incredibly hard, continuous years, locked completely away from civilized society. Their incredibly dark, wicked reign of absolute toxic familial terror officially ended entirely, completely, forever, right now, today, without any single remaining option whatsoever left behind. Absolutely. I remained perfectly seated inside the front wooden row of the completely silent federal courtroom, observing their devastating absolute downfall. I did not project a single microscopic fraction of triumphant joy or openly gloat regarding my total, ultimate, definitive victory tonight. I did not allow a single tiny smile to slightly curl the rigid corners of my completely stoic mouth right now. My entire weathered face remained perfectly carved from incredibly cold, unyielding, hardened stone as I watched the massive, heavy judicial consequences physically crash directly down upon their trembling, miserable shoulders today. I simply sat completely still and deeply absorbed the profound, absolute gravity of this extremely monumental, final, definitive moment forever. I previously spent 5 incredibly dark, agonizing years quietly suffering through their absolute, relentless, systemic, brutal, emotional abuse, completely trapped inside my own sprawling luxury estate. I watched them eagerly plot my total, complete personal destruction utilizing pure, unadulterated, vicious, selfish greed. Now I simply watched the absolute worst, incredibly toxic, malignant cancer being violently, surgically removed entirely from my completely healed, healthy life permanently right now today. Diane and Jasmine completely voluntarily transformed themselves into incredibly malicious financial parasites, actively feeding off my continuous, incredibly severe manufactured misery. I completely successfully dismantled their highly sophisticated, wicked criminal empire, utterly, permanently today. I reclaimed my stolen precious dignity and absolutely, entirely secured my massive, hard-earned financial legacy forever, completely, without fail today. I felt pure, absolute, profound, deep, immense, absolute, unshakable, profound, permanent relief. Wash completely, totally, entirely, completely, safely over my broad, strong, tired shoulders tonight. The incredibly horrific, dark, terrifying, suffocating familial nightmare officially concluded, perfectly, completely, entirely, forever, right now, leaving absolutely zero surviving remnants behind, absolutely, completely, forever, completely, definitively, right now, today, safely, securely, permanently, forever, entirely, completely, without a trace. 4 heavily armed federal bailiffs immediately stepped forward, rapidly surrounding the utterly defeated women. They aggressively secured Diane and Jasmine, tightly holding their trembling arms directly behind their sagging, broken shoulders. The highly trained, stern, uniformed guards physically, forcefully escorted the incredibly treacherous criminals quickly away from the massive wooden defense table forever. Jasmine violently twisted her entirely ruined, sobbing, tearful face backward toward the crowded, silent courtroom audience immediately. She locked her incredibly desperate, weeping, terrified eyes perfectly upon my incredibly unyielding, absolutely cold stone expression. She frantically, repeatedly mouthed a severely desperate, completely silent, pathetic, helpless, broken apology directly toward me. I did not offer a single microscopic, comforting nod or even barely, slowly, deliberately shake my incredibly still head tonight. I simply executed a perfect, sharp, total physical turn, completely turning my broad back completely away. I walked completely out the double heavy oak federal doors. The warm, golden sunlight spilled generously across the sprawling back lawn of my fully restored estate. 6 complete months had passed since the heavy steel doors of the federal penitentiary slammed shut behind Diane and Jasmine. The incredibly thick, suffocating atmosphere of toxic greed and endless manipulation completely vanished from my home forever. My massive property finally felt like a genuine sanctuary of absolute peace and profound healing again. I stood quietly near the expansive glass patio doors, observing a perfectly idyllic scene playing out under the shade of the ancient oak tree. Bradley pushed his young, innocent son high into the crisp afternoon air upon a sturdy wooden swing set I personally constructed with my own 2 hands last weekend. The delightful ringing sound of genuine, pure childhood laughter echoed beautifully across the manicured green grass. Bradley wore a relaxed, comfortable linen shirt and projected an aura of absolute, unburdened joy. The dark, heavy shadows of constant psychological torment no longer haunted his gentle brown eyes. He possessed absolute total sole custody of his precious boy, completely free from Jasmine and her incredibly vicious, destructive influence. I watched the young child kick his small feet toward the bright blue sky, entirely safe and completely deeply loved. The massive, sprawling house behind me smelled of fresh pine and blooming jasmine flowers, instead of cold, sterile calculation and bitter resentment. Every single room previously infected by their overwhelming arrogance now radiated absolute, profound tranquility. I reclaimed every single square inch of my personal physical space and completely purified the entire environment. The vibrant, blooming garden perfectly mirrored the incredible internal resurrection we both experienced after enduring such profound, horrific darkness. We survived the absolute worst betrayal imaginable and successfully built a completely new, incredibly beautiful reality from the scattered, broken ashes. I smiled warmly, watching the heavy wooden swing arc smoothly back and forth, carrying the absolute most precious, valuable legacy a man could ever hope to protect today, right here in this perfectly serene, beautiful moment forever. We were finally free to live our best lives in complete peace forever. I walked slowly out onto the wide, sunlit porch, carrying 2 tall glasses completely filled with freshly brewed iced tea. Bradley looked up from the expansive wooden table and smiled brightly. He carefully rolled out a massive set of highly detailed architectural blueprints, completely covering the smooth wooden surface. We sat down together in absolute comfortable silence, deeply reviewing the incredibly intricate building designs. We were currently constructing the absolute ultimate physical headquarters for my newly established massive $20 million philanthropic foundation. Bradley proudly pointed toward the incredibly beautiful Central Community Center designed specifically to completely shelter and fiercely protect vulnerable elderly citizens from experiencing devastating financial abuse. His incredibly brilliant structural vision perfectly captured the absolute unyielding, resilient strength required to successfully defend innocent lives from profound, malicious greed. I took a slow, refreshing sip of the cold, sweet tea and nodded with deep, genuine approval. We methodically discussed the specific, precise building materials and the incredibly robust security features required to completely fortify the massive structure. We seamlessly communicated with absolute, perfect mutual understanding. We did not simply share a standard, highly professional corporate partnership anymore. We forged an incredibly deep, profound, genuine father and son relationship, entirely born from our mutual agonizing survival and our shared absolute ultimate victory over pure, unadulterated domestic evil. I completely respected his incredible quiet strength and his incredibly fierce, unwavering dedication to protecting his innocent child. He deeply respected my absolute, unyielding, rigid discipline and my completely relentless, precise, strategic mind. We entirely understood the exact, profound, agonizing pain of being violently betrayed by the exact specific women we blindly trusted. We completely successfully utilized that incredibly dark shared trauma to permanently cement an absolute, unbreakable familial bond between our completely healed souls today. I looked directly at the brilliant, talented architect and felt absolute, immense, genuine pride completely swelling inside my old, tired chest. He pointed out the massive, soaring glass windows designed to completely flood the main entrance hall with bright, natural, healing sunlight. He meticulously transformed my incredibly dark, devastating pain into a massive, incredibly beautiful, shining, physical fortress. We completely reclaimed our stolen individual dignity and perfectly united our immense strength to actively prevent any future innocent victims from experiencing our exact, specific, agonizing nightmare right now, forever. We stood in absolute, perfect, lasting harmony today, completely, totally, securely together right here, right now, forever today. I leaned comfortably against the sturdy wooden railing and gazed thoughtfully across the incredibly peaceful green lawn today. I silently reflected upon the massive, incredible, overwhelming success our brand new charitable foundation achieved during its very first 6 months of operation. My highly elite team of corporate attorneys and private investigators successfully rescued over 4 dozen vulnerable elderly individuals from experiencing absolute, total, catastrophic financial ruin. We aggressively intervened when their incredibly greedy, treacherous relatives attempted to systematically drain their hard-earned life savings. We absolutely, completely shattered numerous highly sophisticated criminal conspiracies designed specifically to forcibly commit perfectly sane senior citizens into sterile psychiatric wards. Every single time my dedicated legal team legally obliterated a fraudulent power of attorney document, I felt a profound, deeply healing sense of absolute, perfect, righteous justice. My severe, agonizing personal pain was entirely successfully transformed into an incredibly powerful, impenetrable physical and legal shield protecting absolute innocent lives everywhere today. The incredibly dark, isolating nightmare Diane deliberately orchestrated to completely destroy my existence ultimately birthed an incredibly beautiful, massive protective fortress. I did not simply survive her incredibly vicious, perfectly calculated assassination attempt upon my total personal freedom. I completely, actively weaponized my immense suffering to permanently eradicate that exact, specific type of systemic familial evil completely from this world forever. My massive protected fortune actively financed immediate emergency legal interventions and secured incredibly safe permanent housing for dozens of deeply terrified abandoned seniors right now. I completely found my absolute highest, truest life purpose entirely born from the deepest, darkest, absolute, horrific betrayal imaginable. I stood completely victorious and beautifully whole again, perfectly utilizing my vast, immense power to completely, unconditionally shield the extremely vulnerable forever today. Perfectly, completely, safely, flawlessly, unconditionally, eternally, right now, everywhere, completely, forever, without fail, exactly today. A loud metallic clatter suddenly echoed down the long, pristine concrete driveway, entirely interrupting my incredibly deep reflection right now. The uniformed postal carrier completely finished dropping a massive, thick stack of daily assorted letters directly into my heavy black steel mailbox. He smiled warmly and waved a quick, friendly greeting before smoothly driving his white delivery truck completely away from the beautifully manicured curb. I slowly walked down the long, sunlit path, breathing the crisp, fresh afternoon air deeply into my completely healthy lungs today. I reached inside the dark metal box and retrieved the dense, heavy pile of crisp white envelopes. I immediately flipped the entire stack over and stared directly downward. Resting completely perfectly upon the very top of the massive pile was a thick brown envelope officially stamped directly by the maximum security state penitentiary. The handwritten return address belonged explicitly directly to Diane right now. I stood completely still at the end of the long concrete driveway, holding the thick brown envelope firmly between my trembling fingers. The bright afternoon sunlight illuminated the stark black ink officially stamped by the state maximum security penitentiary. I slowly traced my thumb directly over my own name, carefully written in Diane and her perfectly practiced, elegant handwriting. A massive surge of dark memories instantly rushed back into my mind, attempting to momentarily disrupt my profound, hard-earned peace today. I knew exactly what absolute toxic poison lay hidden beneath the cheap paper seal without ever needing to read a single microscopic word. The heavy pages undoubtedly contained endless, pathetic pleas for my unconditional forgiveness, cleverly disguised as genuine spiritual remorse. She surely weaponized her incredibly sophisticated manipulation tactics to aggressively demand a highly unearned second chance from the exact man she tried to destroy. I could almost hear her desperate crying voice echoing through the enclosed paper, desperately begging me to finance a massive legal appeal. She undoubtedly crafted an incredibly elaborate victim narrative, aggressively blaming her extreme criminal greed entirely upon unforeseen tragic external circumstances completely outside her personal control. I absolutely refused to allow her incredibly toxic, deceitful voice to ever penetrate the sacred boundaries of my restored, completely purified life again. I entirely understood that simply opening the fragile envelope immediately surrendered a massive portion of my newly reclaimed personal power directly back into her incredibly treacherous, greedy hands. A truly repentant human being genuinely accepts the absolute severe consequences of their devastating malicious actions without constantly demanding immediate external salvation from their chosen victims. She deliberately plotted to physically trap me inside a sterile psychiatric ward to completely illegally liquidate my entire massive corporate portfolio. I stared at the dark ink and felt absolutely zero remaining human sympathy for the incredible misery she currently experienced locked inside her cold concrete cell tonight. I possessed absolute total control over my physical environment and my internal emotional sanctuary right now, completely forever today. I gripped the thick, heavy envelope tightly and turned my broad back directly away from the dark metal mailbox. The incredibly heavy, suffocating burden of my massive past trauma completely evaporated into the warm, gentle afternoon breeze right now, completely clearing my incredibly focused, sharp, brilliant mind entirely from her absolute toxic, pathetic presence, eternally, always, right here, exactly today, without fail, forever. I walked completely steadily back up the incredibly long, curving driveway, carrying the thick, sealed envelope directly toward my completely secure private backyard oasis. I smoothly bypassed the massive, heavy wooden front doors and navigated directly toward the incredibly beautiful, gleaming brass fire pit, currently resting perfectly upon the polished stone patio. I stood completely still directly above the deep, dark, metallic bowl and stared fiercely down into the perfectly empty, clean, circular basin. I completely refused to ever accidentally discover the incredibly toxic contents permanently trapped inside this specific, pathetic white paper cage right now today. I slowly reached directly into my tailored trouser pocket and flawlessly extracted a small, simple, completely classic silver matchbox forever today. I flawlessly struck a single, incredibly bright red match violently against the rough, abrasive chemical striking strip, completely illuminating the warm, sunny afternoon right now perfectly forever. The incredibly fierce, intense yellow flame danced wildly against the calm, gentle breeze, directly illuminating my heavily lined, incredibly resolute stone face completely today. I deliberately lowered the completely sealed, unopened envelope directly over the deep, dark, metallic fire pit, without any single remaining trace of emotional hesitation right now, completely today, forever. I gently touched the incredibly bright burning match exactly against the bottom corner of the thick white paper, causing an immediate, rapid, violent ignition entirely, completely today. The incredibly hot, bright flames rapidly consumed the incredibly toxic, cowardly written words, permanently destroying Diane and her final, incredibly pathetic, miserable attempt to forcibly re-enter my completely peaceful, quiet reality right now. I stood perfectly, entirely, rigidly straight and simply watched the burning paper violently curl and slowly turn completely, deeply black inside the deep, beautiful brass basin forever today. The entire toxic physical artifact completely disintegrated directly into incredibly fine gray ash, floating gently away perfectly upon the warm afternoon breeze, completely safely forever today. I successfully executed the absolute, ultimate, profound physical act of completely, permanently severing my entire remaining psychological connection directly away from her incredibly dark, utterly ruined, tragic, pathetic existence entirely today. The incredibly beautiful cleansing fire successfully, completely purified my massive, sprawling personal estate entirely, completely, irrevocably, right now, today, forever, without any question, entirely, completely, successfully closing this horrific chapter, forever, eternally, perfectly, securely, permanently, always, entirely, today, absolutely, right here, forever, completely right, exactly now, safely, endlessly, forever, completely, entirely, totally, unconditionally, perfectly, successfully, forever today. I completely calmly lifted my incredibly steady bare hands and perfectly smoothly brushed the tiny remaining microscopic flakes of dark gray ash completely away from my soft, perfectly tailored cotton shirt today right now. I executed a deeply profound, satisfying exhale, forcefully pushing the absolute final tiny remnants of my massive prior psychological burden completely out of my perfectly healthy lungs forever tonight. I securely turned my broad, strong back permanently away from the incredibly warm, gleaming brass fire pit, completely severing my tragic, painful past entirely forever today without fail. I walked gracefully directly back toward the incredibly vibrant, sunlit backyard, perfectly maintaining my absolutely flawless, rigid posture, completely securely right now. I stepped smoothly onto the bright, beautiful green grass, completely radiating an absolute, immense, profound, unshakable internal tranquility entirely today, completely forever. The bright, glorious afternoon sun immediately washed directly over my completely unburdened, completely peaceful, heavy shoulders, brilliantly illuminating my incredibly vast, stunningly beautiful, secured, massive estate today, exactly forever. Bradley immediately looked up from his incredibly secure, sturdy wooden bench and offered a completely genuine, deeply respectful, supportive, warm smile, completely recognizing my absolute, total, ultimate, final victory today. His incredibly energetic young son suddenly broke into a full, joyful sprint, rushing wildly directly across the incredibly manicured green grass, happily giggling right now, today, entirely, perfectly, forever. He violently crashed happily directly into my waiting, sturdy, strong legs and enthusiastically, forcefully grabbed my large, calloused, weathered right hand completely tightly today, absolutely forever. I stared deeply down into his perfectly bright, innocent, wide, shining, trusting, incredibly beautiful dark eyes, feeling absolute, pure, unadulterated, magical, overwhelming, complete happiness, entirely today, forever, right now. I finally gently allowed a completely massive, unburdened, incredibly authentic, deeply profound, warm, bright, wide, genuine, loving smile to fully, perfectly, brilliantly illuminate my completely, entirely carved, weathered old stone face today, completely, flawlessly, forever. The incredibly long, dark, terrifying, grueling, incredibly exhausting, silent, massive internal familial adjustment was absolutely, permanently, completely, flawlessly, unconditionally, entirely, absolutely, beautifully, completely finished, entirely, forever, completely, right now, completely, successfully, perfectly, wonderfully today. Did you enjoy this story of justice and reclaimed dignity? Let us know your thoughts and which city you are listening from in the comments below. If Howard's journey inspired you, please like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful life stories. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss a new release. See you in the next story with love and respect.